My name is Chris Wolf with the CGA. Rusty Harder, our Director of Rules Competitions, is here as well. And we have a couple guys from the SCGA that you'll meet a little bit later. For this morning, we've always joked that there's a lot of people that know the rules better than we do. So we should be giving a rules presentation. But thankfully, the USGA obliged us this year and sent in the experts to help us. So we have David Staebler and Jay Roberts from the USGA. Appreciate them coming down. David is one of the foremost experts on the rules, so very happy to have him. And Jay recently joined on the USGA. Probably saw we shared a bunch of his videos that he's done on YouTube and social media, and gained a lot of traction with those, and turned it into a job. Formerly played in CGA events, and hopefully we get him back for some this year. But very much appreciate them coming down and giving them a warm welcome. Thank you very much, guys.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We've got a couple of things to share with you today. I don't know if this is too much, but I always try to bring maybe a little bit more than we have time to do, just so that we don't run out of stuff. The main thing that we're here to talk to you about today is the 2023 major changes to the rules. And this is one of the problems with this presentation is that we're presuming that you know the rules well enough so that when we just plug into something that's changed, you already know this. So if you find that you feel like you've stepped into the middle of a conversation when we start talking about some of these major changes, just raise your hand and say, what, could you give me a little context? And we'll be trying to give you context as we talk about this today. But the major changes presentation is, well, what's changed between 2019 rules and the 2023 rules. Then Jay and I are going to get into some stuff that that we think is important. But Jay's going to talk to you about penalty area relief and the nuances of penalty area relief. And I'm going to talk to you about what we call the status of the ball, which is my colleague, many of you may know Catherine Belanger, who's been on our staff probably about 10 years now. She still looks like she's 22, like when she joined us, but she's been on our staff for quite a while at this point. And Catherine said, the status of the ball thing, until you understand it, it's the most complicated, just completely mystifying thing to try to understand. And then somebody says something that just drops the last puzzle piece into place, and you can't believe how simple it is. It's unbelievably simple. So once you come to understand it, and I don't know what that puzzle piece might be for you and you and you if you don't quite understand status of the ball yet. So I'll just go over it again, and maybe that last piece will drop into place for you. And you'll just kick yourself. You go, you mean it's that simple? That's all there is to it? And then when you understand that, what do you understand? Relief. You understand a whole bunch of other stuff in the rules. When this makes sense, an unbelievable amount of stuff in the rules makes sense. For many of us, and I went through this, and Jay has gone through this, you come into golf. I've never met a golfer that doesn't know a lot about the rules of golf. The amount that people know about the rules of golf is not the problem. It's the degree of accuracy of what they know is the problem. Half right and half wrong. Some of the stuff that's wrong was right at one time, and it's not right anymore. Some of the stuff that they know was never right, but it's a myth and it just lives on. So the biggest problem we have is not a lack of knowledge of the rules of golf with golf. It's the degree of accuracy of that knowledge. And many of us come to the rules knowing lots of stuff. And yeah, you've got stuff to learn, but the biggest problem is unlearning the stuff that's wrong. and getting rid of that information. And status of the ball was one of those topics. And in fact, penalty relief is one of those topics. And there's a change to penalty relief for 2022. So there's something you have to unlearn in order to learn something first. And if we have time, we'll talk about provisional golf ball because it's another favorite subject of mine and something that is, again, kind of mystifying to a lot of people. It seems incredibly intricate and I just can't keep track of everything, which way they're going. So let's move to the major changes for 2023. And I'm gonna start and Jay's gonna take over a little bit in the middle and then I'll do the very last piece of it here. But if we go back to 2019, it was a major rebuilding of the rule book. It started 7 years before 2019 with a committee that was called the Working Group. And it was chaired by a past chair of the USGA's Rules of Golf Committee and a past president of the USGA Rules of Golf Committee from Indiana, a man named Trey Holland, Dr. Trey Holland. And their charge was, if you started from scratch and had to build the rules of golf, how would you do it? What would you do? Forget about what it is now. How could we do it to make it simpler and easier to understand? And across a 7-year period, there were various drafts that were put out. And then the Rules of Golf Committee started making comments about it, which then all of a sudden started steering it toward what we already do in many cases. One of the early proposals was, let's get rid of dropping. Let's just place the ball on. Did not make it into the 2019 rule. Did not make it into the 2023 changes. I don't know, maybe coming to the 2027 rules or the 2031 rules, maybe we will place the ball all the time. But it's one of those proposals that's been out there for a long time. That would represent an interesting simplification. We wouldn't have to worry about separate understanding of how to drop a golf ball. But the goal of the 2019 changes was to try, well, initially it was to simplify the rules. It was very quickly realized that if you just made it, like you hear this all the time, they should just make the rules simpler. They started with 13 rules. Why can't we just go back to having 13 rules? All right. Because they didn't work very well. They didn't answer all the questions people had. So then we had 14 and 15 and 16. And before I started in the rules, but when I was playing as a junior, there were 43 rules. And they were organized a little bit like the US Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution. So that you had this initial nicely organized set of stuff. And then, well, this got added in 1933, and this got added in 38, and this got added in 1942, and this got added in 1953, and this got, they just built it up so that it was just a disorganized mess. And back then, you learned the rules by kind of learning where everything was, you know, like you were in this secret society. It was so disorganized that it was very difficult to find. Well, now we've got the rules in 1984. They were completely redone and reduced from 43 rules to 34 rules. And then in 2019, again, 34 rules to 24 rules. Right? So we have fewer rules, but effectively what they did was it consolidated a bunch of rules to eliminate the numerals from 25 to 34 is all that happened. And of course, for 2023, we've added a 25th rule, the modified rules for players with disabilities, which prior to that had only been model local rules that you had to put into effect. Well, now you don't have to put them into effect. They are in effect. If there is a blind golfer who is good enough to qualify for the US Open this year, that blind golfer will be able to play with a caddy and an aide and somebody who can stand behind him or her while they're playing their golf shot, unlike everybody else who's trying to qualify, because they get special accommodations. I can't wait for the day when that might happen. But the overall goal of these 2019 rules and 2023 rules, well, in fact, we didn't simplify the rules because you can't simplify the rules because then you leave questions unanswered. And golfers want answers to everything. So we have to handle all of the logical possibilities. That makes the rules complex, but we're going to try to make the rules easier and simplify where we can simplify. And I think that was done in 2019, and it has continued into 2023 to try to make the rules easier to read, simpler in application. So when we find something that's complex, is there a way to simplify this or not? Another goal of the 2019 rules that's been continued into the 2023 rules is inclusivity. I grew up, and there are enough people in this room who have hair that's the color of mine, who remember that when you were in grade school, and it was usually your female grade school teacher, when you wrote a sentence that said he or she, they would correct you and say, no, you don't write he or she. He includes both the male and the female. And you were usually corrected by a female teacher, weren't you? I see heads nodding yes. You were taught that that's how grammar worked. Well, then I went to college in the 1970s, and this was in the middle of the feminist movement. And the feminists had an interesting point. He does not include she, but she includes he. Why don't we just say she for everything? And then that would be inclusive. Well, what did we do in 2019? We replaced all of the references that were he to he or she to be inclusive, to indicate that both men and women play golf and that the rules would recognize that. What's happened now, and something that's very difficult for many of us to deal with, is using the plural third person, they. When you're referring to one person, the player hit their ball into the rough, and then they lifted it out of ground under repair. But they is meant to be, you know, people complained about the he or she, he or she, he or she, he or she all through the rules book. And the plural third person has become acceptable as grammar now. All of my grade school teachers are turning over in their grades. I'm still uncomfortable with it myself, but I'm a dinosaur. And you know what? This is where the world is right now. Or at least people who are a generation or two younger than most of us, like Jay, is where they are and where they were brought up. And inclusivity is important to this game because that helps grow the game, for one thing. If you make not only men, but you make women welcome to the game. And the United States Golf Association's executive director came from the LPGA Tour, where he got way tuned in to how women got way tuned into the prejudice that this game still has for women players. We can't let women play on Saturday morning. Women are slow. We can't let women do this. They're not as good. And Mike Wan and many of us say, that just ain't true. And so inclusivity is important to the rules, just like it is for the rest of the game. Sustainability. You remember that in 2019, we printed something called the Players Edition of the rules. It was kind of like the Reader's Digest of the rules. It was an utter fail. Because if you went to the rule book, that Players Edition of the rule book, to look something up, you would get the general thing, but you weren't looking for the general thing. It would say, well, and if you need more information, you need to go to the rule book. And what happened with most rule books that we printed anyway and handed out to golfers at golf courses and associations and so on, it went in their golf bag. And if it ever got cracked open, it was usually unsuccessful because you couldn't find what you were looking for anyway, because you didn't know where to look. Even though it's nicely organized, but if you don't understand the organization, well, you can't find what you're looking for. And in fact, the rule book tends to use very general terms that don't make any sense to many golfers. Loose impediment. You say loose impediment to a lot of golfers, and they go, well, I don't know what a loose impediment is. So, okay, well, and it's also an outside influence. What's an outside influence? We don't understand what these global terms are that the rules of golf use. So anyway, this rule book, it would just sit in your bag, mostly not getting cracked open. And then when a new rule book came out, you'd take that one out, put the new one in your bag, and you never used it. Well, the Players Edition was a failure. It just didn't work very well. And the sensibility has changed. This book is now recognized as something that is used by people who organize and run golf competitions. It helped them do that by the rules of golf. This book is not, and this set of rules, I only know one person who ever learned the rules of golf by starting by reading the rule books. And it's because she was a non-golfer. She was married to somebody on our staff. And she was very smart and she wanted to learn the rules of golf. And with my former colleague's help, here's the rule book. Start reading. When you have questions, ask me questions. And she learned the rules by reading the rule book. And she's the only person who I've ever known who did that. All the rest of us, in order to understand kind of what's in that book right now, you already have to understand the rule in the first place. And now you're just checking to see whether the language lines up with what you're trying to make a rule. It's very difficult to learn how the rule works by reading anything that's in this book, because wherever you are, you need to know things that aren't there that are somewhere else. All of the terms, all of the words in here that are italicized, well, they're back here in the definitions section, right? And you need to know what this says in order to understand what that says. So it's very difficult to do that. So the recognition now is that this book is for people that organize and run golf events. It's not for the general public because the general public can't really learn or anything. Look, one of my favorite stories is I got a call one day on our rules line. And the person on the line was a golf club professional who you view as somebody who knows the rules of golf. But many of them are not expert in the rules of golf. They have a little bit of training, but not much. And he said, something happened today And we looked all through the rule book and we couldn't find it. Here's what happened. Joe was on the second hole. He was making some practice swings in the fairway and his club grazed the ball and it moved from here to there. And we looked all through the rule book and we couldn't find it. And in my mind, I said, did you start on the page of the page, the contents page? And look, and you might have noticed a rule that said ball at rest moved. But you see, what they knew was somebody was making a practice swing and grazed the ball. That didn't compute in their mind, the ball at rest moved. So they looked all through the book and couldn't find it. Because the rule book uses very precise terminology and general terminology to cover things like grazing your ball with a practice swing. Well, that's ball at rest movement. Okay, so as far as they were concerned, it wasn't in there. It's never happened before. We looked all through the book, couldn't find it. Well, anyway, I do digress. Getting back to sustainability, we didn't print 4 million players editions of the rules. We saved a lot of paper by not doing that for books that were never used. If you want the rules of golf and you have a cell phone, for free, you can get them. So there you go. This takes the place of the thing that you put in your golf bag. And guess what? It gets updated automatically. And it's going to be used by average golfers as much as they use that book in their golf bag. But we saved a lot of paper. So we're being mindful of the planet. Another goal of the 2019 rules, continuing into 2023, we haven't gotten there yet. And many of you remember the old decisions book, which in its end had 34 rules and over 1,300 decisions. And the rules were compiled out of what the rule book said, plus anything that the decisions said in terms of rulemaking themselves, that the book didn't quite, that the rules didn't quite clarify themselves. One of the goals of the 2019 rules was, can we put all the rulemaking in the rule book? Let's not have a thing we call the rule book and something else that has another third of the rules in the decision book. In 2019, we went to 24 rules and a little over 300 things that were called interpretations. We didn't call them decisions anymore. And in fact said, none of them are rulemaking. They are just, and many of those 1,300 decisions weren't really rulemaking. They were just examples of how you apply a rule. So they were there to kind of help you understand how a rule got applied, but didn't make a rule. But there were still a bunch of decisions that did some rulemaking. And we said, none of these interpretations in 2019 are rulemaking. They're just helpful descriptions of how a rule applies. Until we started looking at some of those interpretations, and they in fact did do some rulemaking. And those things that were identified in 2019 as rulemaking have now gotten incorporated into the rule book instead of being in interpretations. So the goal is, and we still haven't gotten there, because even with some of the now what we call clarifications, a few of those, probably about 25 of the 250 of them, so 10% of them, there's a little rulemaking there, so there's a little more work, but still there's still left to go to get all the rulemaking in the rule book. But we're close. We're much closer than we were in 2016 than we are now. So move the rulemaking from interpretations into the rule book. There's a lot of that. That is, you're going to see in these changes that are going on. An ongoing goal of the rule change process is try to reduce penalties where they can be reduced, where it makes sense. And one of the biggest reduction in penalties in 2023 is the penalty for substituting a golf ball when you weren't allowed to substitute a golf ball. When you pick your ball up on the putting green to clean it and then replace it, the rule says you have to replace that ball. Well, what if you put your special putting ball down? In 2019, and for all the past before that, it was, well, not for all the past, for all the past to 1984 anyway, it was a general penalty. You lost the hole if you played a stroke at this substituted ball that you weren't allowed to substitute. Or you got a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play. Well, that penalty in both forms of play in 2023 has been reduced to 1 stroke. And one of the reasons it got reduced to 1 stroke was that our test center said there is so little difference in golf balls right now that any advantage you might be able to gain by substituting a ball when you aren't allowed to substitute is adequately covered by 1 penalty stroke. There you go, reduction in penalties, where we can reduce them when appropriate. So we're going to talk about penalty application changes. We're going to talk about some equipment changes. We're going to talk about scorecard modifications in the new rules. Jay's going to talk about a whole bunch of things relating to playing the ball, advice and help, and the meaning of agree. This is an interesting one and a hard one to explain. Jay's going to give it a go. Raise your hands if it doesn't make sense. We'll give it a second go and a third go. And then some changes to what we call the boutique rules, the ones 21 to 25 that deal with these special forms of play, Staebler and so forth. Foursomes, where you alternate strokes between partners. 4-ball, where you've got a partner and you each play your own golf ball. The modifications you have to make to the rules of golf, to rules 1 through 20, which are written starting in 2019 and continuing in 23. 1 through 20 are written presuming you're playing individual play, whether it's individual match play or individual stroke play. And then we add the modifications 21 to 25. And there are a couple of modifications in those rules as well that I'll cover at the end of this presentation. Let's start now with the changes to penalties. And I've already previewed the change to substitution. It's gone from a general penalty to a 1-stroke penalty. The other one is multiple penalties. And this has just been pretty much the bane of everyone's existence. If between 2 strokes, you breach more than 1 rule of golf, sometimes we give you a quantity discount and you just get the penalty. You just get a single penalty for the group of breaches that you did. And other times you don't get the quantity discount. You got to count them all up. And how do we do that? And I'm trying to remember what year this all started. And I think it was 2004. And the initial version of multiple penalties had 6 different parts to it. What I am told is that the human mind is quite capable of handling 3 different things at once. But once you get more than 3, the mind can't handle them all at once. You give somebody 4 things to think about and they can't do it. They can think about 3, but the brain just can't handle 4 at the same time. Well, we started with 6 things. All right, of how you got, whether you got multiple penalties or whether you got the quantity discount. And it's been revised and revised and revised and revised and revised and revised again. It was vastly simplified in 2019 from what the predecessor was, but it was still difficult for people to handle. They didn't quite understand. What we had prior to 2023 was when you had 2 rules that were breached between strokes. If the two breaches were related to each other, you put them together. If they were unrelated, you penalize them separately. The other way that you could get multiple penalties would be that you would have two related breaches, but there was what we called an intervening event between them. Somebody told you that you breached the first one, which then reset. And now you did a second thing, which was related to the first one. And since you had an intervening event, well, you should have put them together, but you had this intervening event. So you got penalized for both of them. And many administrators, they could understand the intervening event, but they couldn't understand which rules were related and which rules were unrelated. And in fact, the ruling bodies even disagreed from time to time as to what was related and unrelated. So what the rules of golf committees decided to do was get rid of related and unrelated and just talk about intervening events. Well, an intervening event is one of two things. It's either the completion of a golf stroke. So I've made my previous stroke, and before I complete this stroke that I'm about to play, if I breach more than one rule, I've got no intervening event between those two breaches. So you get the quantity discount. I improve my lie. So I'm now subject to a general penalty. I now play a stroke, intervening event, and I improve my next lie. Well, I get another penalty for improving my lie because I had an intervening event between two of them. Okay. The other way to get an intervening event is to become aware of a breach. I improve my lie. Jay says, David, you improved your lie. That's a penalty. Oh, I didn't know. And then I break a branch to make my line of play better. Well, I had an intervening event between strokes. First one, Jay told me I had a breach. Second one, so now between two strokes, I'm getting two general penalties. So that's the way the changes. It's been simplified. No more related, unrelated. We don't care about that. Nobody understood it anyway, or half of us didn't understand it. And those of us that did understand it, a lot of us thought we understood it. We still didn't understand it. So this has been simplified. And one of the interesting things when you simplify a rule, why can't we go back to 13 rules? You wouldn't like the game. You'd get penalized a lot. Because when you make something simple, then you just lump in a whole bunch of things that are penalties. We don't care why it happened. When everybody wants fairness, that doesn't seem fair. You have to have exceptions. But yeah.
David, the word stroke is specific. So dropping and placing is not an intervening event.
Correct. That has gone away as an intervening event between 2019 and 2023. Yeah. Yep. Putting a ball into play prior to this year was also an intervening event. Yep. So you need to unlearn that. Yep. There we go. All right. So those are the two intervening events. So this has been simplified. And as a result, if you knew how the rule was applied in 2019 and you know how the rules applied now, you're going to find some outlier examples that just don't seem fair. And this is the trade-off we've made, right? Mass misunderstanding versus unfairness. And we'll take a little unfairness to get the ruling right more often.
The completion of the stroke, does it change if the stroke doesn't count for the score?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. The answer is no. It doesn't. It doesn't. And that's a late breaking answer too. That was not answered by the time we first published these 2023 rules. So for instance, my previous stroke, and now I play a wrong ball. I made a stroke. I have an intervening event. even though that didn't count in my score.
Same thing with replaying the ball and play.
With, yes,
Replaying the ball
yes,
and play.
yes, if, right, yes, I'm supposed to replay a stroke, but that stroke is an intervening event as far as applying multiple breaches. Yes. Indeed. And this completion of a stroke. There we go. There's my completion of a stroke. Because all we're looking at now and focusing on now is the stroke. It's brought new attention to. This is what we've meant all along. But here's the deal. I've improved my lie, and I have my ball in the wrong place. Between I made a stroke, I improved my lie, I have my ball in the wrong place. When do I get the penalty for wrong place? Not until I hit the golf ball or make a stroke at the golf ball, right? And so is this before or after the stroke? Oh my God, I don't know what to do. And it says completion of a stroke, which means I just got the penalty, but I'm not done with the stroke yet because I haven't finished my follow-up. So there's the end point. So that this wrong place penalty goes with the improvement of my lie, and we put them together. Not a completion of a stroke. So that all of these penalties that only kick in when you're making a stroke with the ball go backwards to between this stroke and the previous one. You don't have an intervening event because you made the stroke from the wrong place. Does that make sense? I only got a couple of head nods, so it did. You know what? And if this doesn't make sense to you in any multiple penalty situations, Rusty wants you to get on the radio and say, here's what's happening out here. How do I do this? Because your radio puts you in touch with every other mind on the golf course. And you're either all going to get it wrong together or you're all going to get it right. But that's much better than just one of you getting it wrong. Okay?
Recover radios is that.
There we go. All right. There are a couple of exceptions to this. Two major exceptions to this. If you get a penalty stroke for causing your golf ball to move, and you play it from a wrong place. So I got one penalty stroke for causing my ball to move, but the penalty for wrong place is in stroke playing, 2 strokes. It's not a total of 3. It's just that the penalty escalates from 1 to a general penalty. So ball at rest move and not replaced. The worst you can get is a 2-stroke penalty or a loss of hole. You're never going to get 3 strokes in stroke play. If you replace the ball, it's just going to be 1 because it's back in the right place. You don't replace the ball, it just goes to 2. It's never 3. So that's an exception to the multiple penalties up there. Rule 9, ball at rest move, is capped at the general penalty. Exception to this. And anytime that you are taking a penalty involved with relief, penalty area relief, unplayable golf ball, and in the odd case of a ball in a bunker in one temporary water or ground under repair, where you want to take 1 penalty stroke to come out of the bunker, and then you breach the rule and get a general penalty, you never put those together. The penalty relief penalty is always separate from whatever penalty you got in taking penalty relief. So you take relief outside of your penalty area and you drop it 3 club lengths from where it last crossed. Got it in the wrong place, play it from a wrong place. You get 1 stroke for taking penalty relief and 2 more in stroke play for playing from a wrong place. So you never combine those. So this is interesting. In Rule 8, ball at rest move, you always combine them. And in penalty relief, you never combine. And for everything else, you do what's up there.
David,
Yes.
back on the Rule 8 situation. So if your ball moves and you don't see it, because fellow competitor said, when you pull that leaf out, the ball will turn over. And you say, oh, okay, thanks, that's one stroke penalty. And then you go ahead and play it. Even though by definition, there's been an intervening event, you still get the combination of the two. Excuse me, you get the second.
Okay, did everybody hear that question? Because this is an interesting scenario in all of this. Ball at rest move is always capped at the general penalty. So that the intervening event stuff doesn't apply to ball at rest move. So the example that was given was, I caused my ball to move. I didn't realize it was a penalty, but somebody told me it was a penalty. And then I didn't replace it. Should I get 3? No, ball at rest move is always capped at the general penalty. Penalty relief is never capped. And never combined. All right. Yeah. All right. Substitution, we've talked about now both forms of play. It's a 1-stroke penalty. Boy, is that hard for me to unlearn. Because I've been doing this for decades. The general penalty, it's a general penalty, it's a general penalty. Before it was a general penalty, guess what? If you substituted when you weren't allowed to, you never got the ball in play and it was a wrong ball. And you started the next hole and you were disqualified. That happened to a guy in the PGA championship, and that's what led to the change. And therefore, for any events that play the 1-ball rule in this Carolinas, you don't play the 1-ball rule for any of your competition. Good for you guys. Good for you guys. But anybody, if you're ever involved in the USGA qualifier where we do use the 1-ball rule, if somebody plays a ball other than the model and brand, or the brand and type of that they started with, the penalty is 1 stroke a hole now until you figure it out, realize the problem, and correct it, as opposed to a general penalty on each hole, which corresponds with this change. Equipment. Hey, we're going to hear from Jay in just a second, who describes this. Damage to a club during a round, external attachments, building a club, and green reading material. A couple of changes here. Damage to a club. I'm just going to let Jay's great video explain this to you instead of me talking.
So what can you do if you damage a club during a round? You can try to repair it, if that's even possible, and you can still use it, but only for the rest of that round. But the big change in 2023 is that you'll be able to replace it. And damage doesn't just mean snapping a club in 2 pieces. The term damage actually has a really broad application because it simply means any change to the club. So if you played a shot from the cart path and scuffed up the sole of your wedge, those scuff marks will be a change to the club, and that would make it eligible for replacement. There is an exception for abuse though. If you damage your club out of abuse, you're not going to find much sympathy from the rules. You can still use that club for the rest of the round, but you won't be allowed to repair it or replace it. And finally, be aware that there is a local rule that can limit club replacement to only certain types of damage. That'll most commonly be used at elite level competition, but it's always a good idea to check the local rules before you play.
You guys going to use G9? Yes, sir. No, but in USGA qualifiers, we will use G9, which now makes it harder to replace a club, where it has to be significantly damaged. If somebody breaks a club in a USGA qualifier, don't try to understand the rule, get on the radio and figure it out with all of the minds whether this player can replace the club or not. In your Carolina stuff, if it's different than how they started with it and they want to replace it during the round and they happen to have another club available to them, la-di-da, it's your lucky day. Generally not something that happens very much in most play of golf below the very expert level, where you've got club vans there and all the manufacturers and people can bring a remade club to you instantly. Just doesn't happen in our world. All right. Yep, the damaged club, no matter how it's damaged, if it's damaged to the point where it would meet the definition of non-conforming, it's still treated as conforming for the rest of that round. So go ahead, chip with it, chip with the half that's still got the club head on it. Have a nice day. All right. Or repair or replace.
Let me also add something
Yep.
relating to that video, just for full transparency. The latest version of that video did have a scene change. So the scene of myself trying to repair that club with duct tape is a questionable means of repair. So
And questionably effective too. Okay, stupid thing to do.
Yeah. So don't try to repair.
But you know what, but I love that part of the video because it kind of makes the point, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Repair it if you can. Right? All right. External attachments. How many of you have seen players with these stickers on their metal woods or their iron? Yeah, okay. And prior to 2023, if you started around with those things on your club, you had a non-conforming club and you couldn't use it. It counted as one of your 14 clubs, but you couldn't use it. Starting in, well, we had clarification, I think in 2022 that said, hey, look, if you take them off before you use them, before you use the club, you're good. You can use the club. That's now baked into the rule. So if you start your round with some of these stickers on your club face, and you're lining up and you go, oh, wait a minute. Or somebody looks at your club and says, hey, David, you're not allowed to have those stickers on your club. If I take them off before I make the stroke, I'm good. But if I make the stroke with those on, those are considered external attachments. And is the first stroke a general penalty and the second one a DQ, or is it, you go, I think we go straight to DQ.
I think it is.
Somebody look that up for me? Straight to DQ, okay? I was doing a US senior amateur qualifier this year. And a friend of mine who ruined my week in the 1989 Philadelphia Amateur by beating me in the final. I noticed on the back nine, he had several irons in his bag that had those stickers on them. And I asked him about that. And he said, yeah, the reason that some of my irons don't have stickers on them is because I've used those irons today. The ones that have stickers on them, I haven't used them yet. Okay. That was the correct answer. All right. If you're going to add a club, you can have a club and break the shaft of my driver. It just shattered. I didn't abuse it, just broke it. And I called to the pro shop and say, do you have a whatever club I have? It's I don't know. And I'm not going to name a brand. This head and this shaft that's broken, you have that in the pro shop. Well, yeah, I've got those components. Can you put it together for me and bring it out to me? That's fine. I can add that club. But if I'm carrying that shaft and that head, or somebody else on the golf course is carrying that shaft and that head, I can't assemble that club and add it to my bag out of components that are being carried on the golf course. Why? Everybody else who doesn't have component clubs is horribly disadvantaged if I would be allowed to assemble a new club on the golf course and everybody else has to get one from the pro shop. So we're going to make this hard too. All right. I can't add a club to my bag that I have assembled out of components that are being carried on the golf course for me or for somebody else.
Why isn't that considered a 15th club anyway?
Well, no, if I'm allowed to add a club. Hey, I broke my driver.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're carrying the components in your bag, why is that?
Oh, if you're carrying components in your bag, well, because a golf club is a shaft and a club head put together. Separate, a shaft is not a golf club. A club head is not a golf club.
But you can't put that shaft. You can't carry a shaft.
I can carry a shaft, but if I'm gonna replace a club, I can't use that shaft to replace my club.
I'm saying replace the shaft. In other words, you just take the head, the old head, put the shaft on. That's,
So I can, with my driver, I'm sending the broken driver back to the pro shop. Can you put a new shaft in it? That's fine. Because I wasn't carrying that driver head as a component. It was a part of the broken club. I'm sending it into the golf shop, assemble it there with the new shaft that's there, that wasn't being carried on the golf course by anybody. Okay? Just telling you what the rule is. And green reading materials, clarification 4.3A1, which is a clarification that is clearly rulemaking and should be in the rule book, but isn't. A very, very minor change has been made to this rule, which is that I can't use a map of a putting green that is bigger than 3/8 of an inch per 5 yards on a piece of paper that is bigger than 4 1/4 by 7 inches. So the piece of paper can't be any bigger than that, and the scale can't be any bigger than 3/8 of an inch per 5 yards. To help me read a stroke plate from the putting green. Prior to 2023, I also couldn't use anything that didn't meet the scale requirements for a stroke plate from off the putting green with a putter. So we've eliminated that. Go ahead, use the giant map that you brought with you and unfold it for the stroke plate from off the putting green. But once your ball's on the putting green, you're going to make a stroke for the putting green. Now you're limited to the smaller scale. That's the change in green reading materials. There's also a new option. I don't know why anybody thought that any tournament organizer would do this. Somehow they thought that the NCAA would do this. And when this was announced to the coaches convention in December, I think, in Las Vegas, the coaches went ballistic at the suggestion that they would put a model local rule into effect that you couldn't use green books when you're on the putting green. Now, the main reason is that most of those coaches just don't know whether some of their players are totally incapable of reading the green if they didn't have a book. And they didn't want to take that chance. But anyway, you can have a model local rule. You contemplating any events where you're going to do that? No. Not contemplating any events. I haven't heard of any events that are doing that yet, but that may come. And one of the things that the rules of golf committees do with model local rules is they float proposals out there and they see whether or not anybody's going to take us up on it. I have a feeling this one's pretty much dead on arrival, but who knows what's going to happen. That's just my opinion. All right. Scorecards. A significant change in stroke play only with putting your handicap on a scorecard. Prior to 2023, it was your responsibility to make sure if the pro shop printed your handicap on the scorecard, it was your responsibility to make sure it was correct. And if it wasn't, it's a big problem if it's too high. You get disqualified. Starting in 2023, the responsibility for handicaps in stroke play events is the committee's responsibility. So if they hand you a scorecard and they've screwed it up, Well, you're gonna play the entire round thinking you get 12 strokes. And then when you come in, they're gonna say, you know what, we actually got that wrong, and you're only getting 9 strokes, but you're not disqualified. It's just an administrative error on the committee. And with more and more golf courses conducting competitions and allied golf associations conducting handicap competitions where you print scorecards and put people's handicaps on them, this is just a much better answer than saying, well, even though we did it wrong, it's your fault. Nope, it's the committee's fault.
The rules of golf changed in 2023, and so did handicap requirements and stroke play events. Prior to 2023, if you played in a net stroke play event, it was your responsibility to put your handicap on your scorecard. And if the committee did that for you, it was still your job to verify that it was correct. But between different sets of tees, handicap allowances, course handicaps, and playing handicaps, it could be confusing and easy to make a mistake. Submit a handicap too low and it would stand, but you weren't getting as many strokes as you deserve, but submit it too high and you'd be disqualified. But in 2023, that's no longer an issue because you're no longer required to put your handicap on your scorecard. That is now the responsibility of the committee or whoever's in charge of the competition. Just remember that this only applies in stroke play. It's still your responsibility to know your handicap in match play.
Match play is still your responsibility to get it right because, hey, hole by hole, I'm playing against you and I need to know if I'm getting a stroke on this hole or not, and if something's misrepresented, it's the problem of the misrepresenter. All right, stroke play only. There is a model local rule for people who want to live in the past and still make this, who just can't get it out of their heads, this shouldn't be a player responsibility, to make this a player responsibility. I personally hope this one's dead on arrival, but lots of people can't handle change, so we'll see. Marker certification on a stroke play scorecard. When your marker quits in the middle of the round and you need to now switch markers, up until 2023, you had to get both markers to sign for the part of the round that they had marked for. And if you didn't have, if you had 2 markers but didn't have 2 marker signatures on your scorecard, you would get disqualified. A change in 2023 says that if your new marker has watched you play all of the holes the other marker watched you play, that they were marking for, we'll just take the single signature of the marker that watched you play all of the holes. You don't have to get 2 marker signatures anymore. And that would be okay. A great victory for common sense. There is also an interesting model local rule that's been floated out there. Are you guys using this model local rule?
Yeah.
Okay, so that if you submit a scorecard that doesn't have your marker signature on it, the rule says you're disqualified, just like you didn't sign the scorecard. Right? But we have a model local rule that says if either your signature or your marker signature is missing, you won't be disqualified. You'll just get a 2-stroke penalty on the last hole of your round. And your scorecard will be accepted. Guess what? PGA Tour is using it. The LPGA Tour is using it. The DP World Tour is using it. The PGA of America, and the PGA Championship, and the Women's PGA Championship is going to use it. The USGA is going to use it in all of our championships, stroke play championships. Carolinas is going to use it. It's pretty obvious that this is one that's been floated out there that is kind of reaching general consensus. And if things continue the way they're going to start this season, then this will become part of the rules in 27. But this is another way of the rules committee saying, we're floating something out there, we're seeing if it's acceptable, and if it turns out to be acceptable, it'll eventually get baked into the. All right, enough of me. Mr. Rock.
All right, I have a slightly modified
Oh, that's right.
presentation.
Yep.
I'll swap it out real quick.
Just put your thumb drive in and open it.
Should I eject it first?
There's another, no.
Oh, you got another one.
No. Yeah. You might want to minimize that.
I know, I think one of these are corrupted, but I know which one. My computer just sucks.
That it? You know what slide you're going to?
Yeah.
That's it. Then I can probably finish with that.
Yeah. All right, let me make sure this works here. Yeah. All right, cool. Okay, before I jump into this real quick, I just want to take a quick minute or two just to share how special this is for me, because the CGA is a really big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. Back in February of 2021, I was voluntold at my home club, Skybrook in Huntersville, North Carolina, to join the Rules and Handicapping Committee. And I said, all right, that's fine. I got no problem doing that. But if I'm going to do it, I want to make sure I do a good job. So I signed up for a CGA workshop virtual, and it was an hour or two long. Didn't get, too deep into the weeds, but it was just enough to cover probably most of the things you'd encounter on the golf course. And at the end of that webinar, I left with several things that I thought I knew and absolutely didn't. And I think that's how many golfers feel. I've been playing the game for a long time. I'm pretty decent at the game. And that really piqued my curiosity into the rules. And I wondered, okay, well, if I thought I knew all of those things, what else don't I know? And so I took the next step. I signed up for a PGA, USGA workshop. It's a week long, super deep dive into every rule. And at the end of that week, my mind was absolutely melted. And I was able to confirm that I knew nothing about the rules. So being a competitive person, that really ignited my desire and passion to dive into these things as much as I could to learn as much as I can. And so that was back in February, and it's been a wild journey ever since. I started experimenting with videos and realized that, there really wasn't a lot of good video content out there that sort of got into the details and into the weeds to a degree that I wanted, that I thought would help me learn the rules. And started making some YouTube videos, and, this guy found me on the internet, and we sort of became friends, and he sort of started keeping a watchful eye on me and sort of became a mentor. So before I started putting videos out, I'd say, David, check this out. What do you think? He said, well, you got this wrong, you got that wrong, and then change that. And it really became sort of this unique friendship that we developed. So it's really cool to be here, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the CGA. So huge shout out to Rusty, Chris, the rest of the crew. I'm probably not allowed to say this, but think the CGA is our best AGA that we have, so.
Keep it up, guys, but
Let me say two things. One is that Jay got a whole lot right and not much wrong, which was amazing with social media rules stuff. And the second thing is, and most of you know this, people who are good at the rules, you know who all of them are. You don't get people coming out of nowhere in the rules. He came out of nowhere. He ramped up in less than 2 years. Nobody knew who he was, and he started putting stuff out on the internet. That, as I told, and I told this to Jay before we hired him. I said, the stuff you've done in video is better than anything we've ever done. Because you know how to talk to the average golfer, and we're just a bunch of rules nerds that know how to use our terms. And so I was thrilled when we had the opportunity to hire Jay.
appreciate that, David. Yeah, internet's a powerful thing, and we've got a long way to go. We're just getting started. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are on social media right now? Have you seen any of these videos? Decent amount. If you're not on social media, don't worry. As of right now, every video that we've made and posted can be found actually through the Rules app. So at the bottom menu, there's a latest feature tab, and we're uploading all the videos there. So you don't have to be on social media to get them. We're also working on finding a repository, if you will, a centralized place where you can find all these videos. It's probably going to be the website. So we're working on that, but I'm always open to video idea requests. So if you have any content, any video rules topics, send them my way. Do my best to make them. But all right, so we're still on the 2023 changes, and we're going to go through a progression here about changes involving sort of being out on the golf course and playing the golf ball. So we've got a number of things to go through here, and we're going to start with one that really ties into one of the central principles of the game of golf, which is playing the course as you find it. So as you guys know, there's several conditions that are protected, conditions that affect the stroke. And there was a period of time in 2019 where, well, it still happens today, but some of those conditions could be altered, changed. And we have situations, we have rules that tell us what we're supposed to do. But what we didn't have was a clear guidance on what happens if a referee worsened one of our conditions. So we're talking about a lie, our stance, swing, line of play, the leaf area where the ball is going to be dropped or placed. So imagine a situation where a player calls a referee over and they worsen one of the player's conditions. The rules didn't give us clear guidance on when it was okay to restore them and when it didn't. So it was a maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. And I think we took the position of, hey, look, the referees are out there to help us. They're our friends. We don't need to put them in any situation whatsoever where the player is going to ultimately have grievances against the referee. So in 2023, we've made this blanket approach that says if the referee worsens your condition in any way, and in any situation, it's okay, not a big deal. The player is going to be able to restore those conditions and they're going to be made whole. So a great protection to you guys. You guys have a hard job already, enough as it is. We don't need to make it harder for you. The rules don't need to make it harder for you. So a good change there for protecting our referees. When we made the 2023 changes, public announcements, we sort of approached the general public with 5 key changes, and this is one of them. As you guys may recall, there was a pretty famous incident back in 2019 involving Mr. Ricky Fowler at the 2019 Waste Management, and we've got a clip here, and just so everybody remembers.
Fowler has dropped the ball twice. The ball's gone back into the penalty area. That's correct, Gary. So now placing the ball where the ball struck the course in the second drop. He's in a tough spot here. And You could really have issues. I mean, with a good shot from this indication, how close to the grass is and how steep the bank is, Ricky's looking, that's crazy. I don't know how that ball sat there for all that.
So, Ricky's ball went into the penalty area at first. He took his relief, dropped twice. It wouldn't stay in the relief area, so he ends up placing it, and it stayed at rest. And then magically, as he's assessing the green, it rolled back into the penalty area. So at that time, the only option for Ricky was to take penalty area relief again, add another penalty stroke. And my goodness, did social media bust out their torches and pitchforks. They raised a whole new level of HE double hockey sticks, and really had a strong opinion about that. Thankfully, thank goodness, Ricky went on to win that week. Otherwise, who knows what happened. But anyways, that situation did put a large spotlight on that situation, and it really elevated that situation, which really didn't happen hardly ever. I mean, it was a pretty rare occurrence, but it did make that situation go to the table for the ruling body to discuss, thought about it, and they said, you know what, it just doesn't happen enough. It's okay. Well, over the course of several years later, it seemed to happen all the time. And after the second or third occurrence, we finally said, all right, we need to do something about it. So we did put a change together to specifically address this, which involves creating a new exception. And I've got a video here. So we'll just.
One of the rules changes for 2023 is a new exception when your ball is moved by natural forces. When natural forces move your ball, you'll generally just play it as it lies. But if you've taken relief from a penalty area and a gust of wind blows it back into the penalty area, if you couldn't play it as it lies, your only option was to take relief again for another penalty stroke. And that was a bit harsh. So in 2023, that's no longer the case. Under the new exception, if the ball is at rest after you've dropped, placed, or replaced it, and natural forces move it to a different area of the course, then you must replace it on its original spot. So in the case of that penalty area, you'd simply replace the ball and play on without penalty. And the same would apply if you found yourself in a situation where you dropped, placed, or replaced it near a bunker. Just replace it and play on. Do be aware, though, that replacing the ball under this exception is a requirement, even if natural forces move your ball to a more desirable outcome.
Any questions?
Here's an interesting comment. To make the rules fairer, what did we have to do? Make them more complicated.
Right. So as referees, I think the key thing to take away here is, if you're ever out on the golf course and you've got a situation where a player calls you over and they say, my ball just moved, but I didn't, it just moved. There's a couple of things that you want to make sure that you're tuned into. So first of all, we need to establish the fact that it moved. All right. So we've got the definition of move. The ball needs to be at rest on a spot, needs to leave that spot, come to rest on another spot. And we have a standard to determine what caused the ball to move. And you've got to be known or virtually certain that the players caused that ball to move. And if the player hasn't moved it, then we're just going to blame it on natural forces. They're the bad guy. So if we've got a ball that's been moved by natural forces, I think that those check box that I put in the video is a great way to sort of think about it. So ball moves by natural forces. All right, let's take a quick second and see if we can check these boxes off. Was the ball dropped, placed, or replaced? If it wasn't, the exception doesn't apply. We're going to play it as it lies. If we do check that box off, then we're now going to see, did the ball change areas of the course? Or did it go out of bounds? If we don't check that box off, play it as it lies, just normally. If we do check both of those boxes off, this exception is going to kick in. We're now going to replace the ball. So I think we covered really the three most common scenarios where this is probably going to come into play. So we've got a situation where
you've just taken relief from a penalty area. It rolls back into a penalty area. The ball is embedded just above the bunker. Take relief, rolls back into the bunker, or you take preferred lies on the fringe, the general area, and then it rolls onto the putting green. So it was really cool for me though, because the PGA Tour asked for some help in educating their players on the 2023 changes. They knew we were making some videos. They asked for this video and for the back of the line video, which we'll see in a little bit. And I think this was the following week, the week after they sent these videos out to the players. Do you guys remember at Torrey this year, Farmers Insurance Open, when Max Homa was mic'd up? He was mic'd up on 13. It was a really cool situation to begin with. But this almost happened to him. His second shot landed just short of the green in the wall of the bunker. It embedded. He called the referee over. He took his relief and it wouldn't stay in place. So he dropped, placed. And you can hear him because he was mic'd up. But before the referee started walking away, he said, now, just so I have this right, if this ball were to just magically move back into the bunker, I get to replace it, right? And the referee said, yeah, absolutely. And I think it was just really cool because this is a concept, this is difficult to understand on paper. But if you put some kind of video together to it, it helps to retain in the brain. And I can only assume that part of the reason why Max probably remembered that was because he saw this video. I don't know. That's just my theory. I'm sticking to it. But
and let me add something here. And that is the tour called us and said, could we have these videos? Because we know that if we email the players with a description of these changes, they won't read them. But if there's a link to a video, they're very likely to check it. And Max understood, right? If they just mailed out the changes, never would have gotten on his radar.
yeah. So video is powerful, but any questions on this situation, this rule change? Does everybody feel comfortable
Just to
about this?
confirm, it's any relief, whether it's penalty relief or free relief, you take it drop in place. So if you take relief from ground under repair, go through the process, and then the ball rolls in the bunker.
Right. Has the ball been dropped, placed, replaced? Doesn't matter why. It's one of those three. Absolutely. That's going to be most common with the ball moving onto the putting green at the end there. So it's a lift, clean, and place relief. The ball has been placed. So if it changes areas of the course, we're gonna have to replace that ball. Very well received change, by the way, from the general public. Okay, we've got I don't think, I guess technically it's a change, but I think a better way of describing this is a correction of an oops that was made in 2019. So with the way that it was, the verbiage was worded in the 2019 rules, it exposed a very tiny crack that allowed and didn't penalize a player if they were to clean their ball while it was on the ground. Because the wording was very specific about, hey, this is when you can clean it, you can't clean it when the ball is lifted. So imagine a scenario like this, similar to this, ball's on the ground, you've got a clump of mud on it, you've got a leaf sticking to it, pine straw, whatever. Theoretically, if you were very careful, whether it was with your hands or with a tee, you could knock that stuff off your ball. And that is effectively cleaning the ball. And if the ball is on the ground, well, the four times when you're not allowed to clean the ball didn't cover that. So in 2023, we've made sure to include that scenario. So now you are not allowed to clean your ball if it's on the ground. We've kind of shut the crack there on that one. Anybody want to tell me the 4 times that you're not allowed to clean a lifted ball?
If your ball's
It's off the green, but it interferes with another person's stroke. You got to pick it up, but you can't play it.
Yep,
You want to pick it up.
there's one.
Let this presentation for.
Let's see for ID. Two,
Cracks is what we say.
see if it's cracked, cut it cracked.
See if a rule applies, I can bet it.
Bingo.
What a good group. See, now,
Smart.
got on the radio, you would have gotten all of them, right?
And that is, that's an exhaustive list. So those are the 4 times that you can't do it. I think very commonly we get the question, all right, so, you know, my ball's in the fairway, I accidentally nudge it, I move it. But we know that's a 1-stroke penalty under 9-4. We have to replace the ball. Can you clean it before you replace it? And the answer is yeah. It's not one of the 4 times that you're not allowed to clean it. So that is an exhaustive list. And we get the question a lot, when are you allowed to clean the ball? And the easiest way to answer that is just remember the 4 times that you're not allowed to clean the ball, and then you can clean it. So. Okay, back in the line relief, one of our 5 key changes again that we publicize for general knowledge consumption. So 2019, this procedure, the way it was structured, the way it was worded, it was just an absolute mess and didn't make sense. And it was problematic. It was just, we were trying to force this procedure to be like all of the other relief procedures, but you know, essentially what it broke down to was, you know, the player had to pick their reference point where they were going to drop in relation to. The rule recommended them to mark that spot. But if they didn't mark the spot and they dropped it anyways, then the spot where the ball first touched the ground became the relief point or the reference point, which then created the relief area. And if that ball bounced a little bit closer to the hole than that reference point, then we've got a situation. The ball is not in the relief area. It's now in the wrong place. So we created a local rule to sort of fix everything, put a Band-Aid on the situation. And if this local rule was in place, no big deal if the ball rolls closer to the hole than that reference point. It was just a mess. And if any of that, if none of that made any sense, don't worry about it because you don't have to know about it anymore. The back of the line procedure has been highly simplified.
The rules.
And I've got a video for it.
2023. The back on the line relief procedure has been simplified, and here's what it looks like. But to use the penalty area as an example, I'm going to keep the point where the ball last crossed between the hole and where I want to drop it. I can go back as far as I want on the line, but I have to drop it on the line because that's what activates this relief option. If I don't drop it on the line, I'll be dropping it the wrong way. The relief area won't get created, and I'll have to correct my mistake by dropping it again, but in the right way on the line. But once dropped on the line, the ball can roll up to 1 club length in any direction, even if it rolls forward and closer to the hole. Back on the line is a great relief option for penalty areas, but you can also use it when you decide that your ball is unplayable.
So again, much simpler. The process of using back in the line relief doesn't change up until you drop the ball. So you're still going to find where the ball last crossed in the penalty area. That's going to be your reference point. Draw a straight line from the flag through that spot. Go back as far as you want. But now we're just saying you got to drop it on the line. I've gotten several comments again, but you know, these are just from social media. You know, what are we supposed to do if we don't have a computer graphic showing us exactly where the line is? Okay. Just like many other things in golf. Right, there's going to be, you can estimate. Okay, we have to use our best reasonable judgment to figure out where that line is. And given the circumstances, it's, you know, it's generally going to be accepted. So use your best reasonable judgment and then drop it on the line. The ball hitting that line is what activates this relief area, and the ball can roll it up to 1 club length in any direction. So no longer do we need this local rule that says if it rolls forward and closer to the hole than that point, it's okay. This is now just baked into the rule. But very simply, just drop it on the line. If you don't drop it on the line, we're not going to activate the relief area.
the ball's not gonna be in the right place, and I think technically you haven't even started that relief procedure. I think we
I
had,
think that's right.
I think we had a conversation.
So you could
about
change
that.
options.
You
Yeah.
could change
You could
options.
change options. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
If you haven't activated that relief area, yeah. You haven't dropped under that option.
So
You just thought.
Yeah. Great change, I think. It makes a lot of sense. It gets rid of some local rules. And I think here, we've got some diagrams in the rule book that show us really, well, several things, but, you know, we have a laser, we got a laser on this, right?
Yeah, right. Not the total top, it's like it's right above.
Oh. Gotcha, okay. So again, just a demonstration here. We've got player here hits their ball into a penalty area. This is yellow, okay, so we're not getting lateral relief. But you know, the key here is big circle. You got a big circle. That circle is only activated after the ball is dropped on the line. So there's an example for penalty area. We've got temporary water here, abnormal force condition. Again, back in the line was an option here. Circle. One stroke though, you want to get out of that bunker. You can drop it in the bunker for no strokes, relief from an abnormal course condition, but if you want to get out, it's going to cost you a penalty. And then we've got unplayable here. Again,
Option 2, I'm pretty sure we're gonna encounter this. With a new rule change.
I'm sorry, option 2.
Option 2, they drop it and it bounces forward, and before anybody says anything, they pick it up and drop it again.
Dope slap.
Okay.
What happened?
Yeah, it will.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Oh, yeah.
I had one in a tournament. After the 2023 rules were announced. Ball embedded beside the green, it's closely mown like Ricky had. Ball was marked. And it rolled back into the bunker. And I said, you have to put it in the bunker. They said, no, the rule has changed. I said, January 1. Yeah, sorry, but you play it from where it is. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And then again, here we've got a player taking unplayable ball relief from what appears to be a ball that was probably embedded in the bunker. So you can take one penalty stroke for unplayable in the bunker. Since the ball is in the bunker, you can stay in the bunker for free. One penalty stroke for using unplayable. If you want to get out, it's going to cost you another one. But again, back of the line there, again, circles, circles, circles. We like circles. Not to be confused with stroke and distance, though. That's still going to be that semicircle. We have our reference point is going to be where the stroke was last played from. You get one club length from that spot, no closer to the hole. I don't know if anybody picked up on that. Watching the players this past weekend, Taylor Montgomery, one of the final groups later in the rounds, hits it long hits it over the green on 17. Because of where that ball entered the yellow penalty area, it did open up a third option for him for that hole back in the line, which he used. He hits that ball over the green again, and then he takes stroke and distance from where he chipped from long on the walkway. A lot of people were saying that he probably didn't know that he got one club length from where he hit from, because his ball was from the rough. He was playing from the rough, and playing from the short stuff was probably more ideal. But I know I've made that same mistake too. You think you have to go back as close as you can to where you last played from, but you still get one club length.
Relief area, drop it in. Anyways, that's off topic. Okay, so we've got some good changes here when it comes to a ball being deflected and specifically on the putting green. And for this, we go to rule 11 for guidance to figure out what we're supposed to do. But the way that the rule is structured in 11, it starts out by saying, hey, look, if you play your ball and it deflects off of something, we're normally going to play it as it lies. And then as we get through the rule, it starts to pluck out certain things where we no longer play it as it lies, these exceptions. And in 2019, they were pretty broad. It said that if you played your ball from the putting green and it hits a person, a movable obstruction, or an animal, stroke doesn't count, you got to replay it. We're going to cancel that stroke, you got to replay it. There were a few things plucked out of each of these buckets. For example, movable obstruction, a ball marker, for example, your ball hit a ball marker, you still play it as it lies. That's one of the exceptions to the exceptions here. But it caused a couple problems because a person was a person, a human being, and that included the player themselves. Movable obstruction, that included the club that the player used to make that stroke, their putter, more than likely. And then animals, well, animals, the definition of animal includes every living organism in the animal kingdom, and that includes insects and whatnot. So when we get to how this could be problematic, is we had situations like this. Player goes to tap in a short putt, it horseshoes and it hits their foot. So we have a ball played from the putting green and it hit a person. It hit the player. A player is a person. And so that player got to cancel that stroke and replay it. They got a mulligan. Basically what happened. That wasn't really the intent behind what this rule is trying to do. Same with the putter. We've had situations that came up in the queue. Try to tap it in, horseshoes, it hits the player's putter. It's a little nuance to that one, but not really. The putter, the putter does possess multiple definitions at the time, but it also is a movable obstruction. So the player got to replay it for free. And then animals were also an issue. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before. This is a clip of Paul Casey on the European tour. Makes a stroke from the putting green. And there was a little bug walking across his line right there. And it was determined that the ball it hit that insect, at least from that camera angle. So what happened was after the round, he had no idea. He made his putt, carried on like nothing happened. And then when he got into scoring, what was it?
It's John Paramore.
It was John Paramore. Rest in peace. So John approaches Paul and says, hey, gotta ask you something. Well, actually, because you know the story, right?
Yeah. Okay.
It might be better. If you
Okay,
say it, yeah.
John Paramore goes to Paul Casey and said, I've got to show you something. He shows him the video on his cell phone. And then says to Paul, because the rule said, if it's known or virtually certain that your ball hit an animal. He says, did you realize your ball hit that bug? And Paul said, no. And John said, good answer. Because if he'd have known, he would have not replayed the stroke, and he wouldn't have holed out on that hole and would be disqualified.
So the known or virtually certain is only in the eyes of the player.
You are going to ask the player in this case if they were aware of this. Yes. Or if anybody else in the group was aware of it and told him. But anyway, this was a problem with insects, basically. So
Yeah, right. So
back to Jay.
in 2023, we have now plucked out those exceptions. So I mentioned the 3 issues and having that such broad categories where we cancel the stroke and replay it. Now within those categories, within those buckets, if you will, we've got certain things that, hey, look, we're going to play it as it lies. So one of them is the player. So if it hits a person, you're going to cancel and replay the stroke. But if it hits the player, you, then tough luck. You're going to play the ball as it lies. The club used to make the stroke. So again, play it as it lies. It hits your putter. And then animals, we have clarified to say, look, only animals that can also be defined as loose impediments, which, you know, it's going to bring in all the insects, worms, things like that. So we've cleaned that up. And probably also worth pointing out that, because I don't know that the slide, oh, actually, that's the next point. Okay. So we get a lot of questions on this Rule 11 and these deflections and when you play it as it lies and when you don't. Anybody have any questions about this?
Just a suggestion, if you put a chart. It's just, you know, nice simple chart, right, which most of it's created anyway.
I see it. I see a chart in a video somewhere. Let me work on that.
So a ball in motion, the putting green, by definition, it's an outside influence. But do you treat that as a movable obstruction, or how is that handled in this case?
I think you had the most experience in dealing with those immediate publication changes on that specific one.
Let's just talk about just about every object that you'll find on a golf course has multiple statuses. They don't just acquire that status when something happens to the golf ball. You've got a golf ball. It's your equipment. It's a movable obstruction. It's an outside influence. And it's always those 3 things. And then it also might be in play, or it might be a long ball, or a provisional ball, or so on. It could acquire other traits to it. But it never loses any of those statuses. It's just that when something happens to the golf ball, you read the rule and it says if this golf ball hits an outside influence, well, your golf ball is an outside influence. All right. So you apply the status of the ball that matches up with the rule. It's just never, it's like, well, one it's not the other. No, it's always down to go. And everything has multiple status.
Yeah, that was a concept that was I've never really grasped for a long time, and the putter is a great example. Now I could never figure out why. Why is the player canceling in 2019, canceling the stroke when it hits their putter? You know, the putter's equipment. It doesn't talk about equipment. But you know, finally the light bulb went off, like multiple statuses, multiple definitions. And I think that's pretty parallel in line with status of the ball, which I think is just phenomenal concept and presentation. But
Jay, I might have missed this. Player balls on the putting green, he puts it. There's in the fall, there are leaves all over the place, the ball rolls across the leaf into the hole. Okay, there's a leaf, a loose impediment at that time, and he has to replay the stroke or the stroke down. And what about if a leaf is blowing across the green and the ball hits?
yeah, I think there were previous decisions that had an outcome on that. But you know, if we look at the things that matter in 11, ball played from the putting green that gets deflected. We've got 3 categories here: person, movable obstruction, animal.
Okay.
Does a leaf fall into any of those categories?
But
There was a time
okay,
There was a time.
when if your ball hit a moving loose impediment, you replay.
okay.
Let's do the thing for Men in Black. Let's get that out of your head. You gotta get that out of your head. All right. Your memory of what the rules were is your worst enemy.
But what I thought the rule was anyway.
Yeah.
So it's always good to just check the rule.
So we have now situations where we'll stick with the putting green where we've made a stroke. And it hits one of those things that require the stroke to be replayed. Which is a difficult concept for a lot of players to know, especially in the heat of battle on the golf course. And oftentimes they just don't know that they're supposed to replay the stroke, that it doesn't count. So what oftentimes happens? They don't even know that they've made a breach, to be honest, but something's happened. They're supposed to replay the stroke. They don't. They go on to play the ball where it comes to rest. In 2019, when you played a ball that was supposed to be canceled and replayed, I think the player really got the ultimate benefit of it all, because the stroke that got the player from A to B didn't count. They make their next stroke, they just get the general penalty for playing from the wrong place. So theoretically, they only had a net 1 penalty stroke in that situation. So in 2023, we've cleaned that up. So if I make a stroke and it's supposed to be canceled and replayed and I don't, and I then play it again, that stroke's going to count. What I just made is going to count. And I'm also going to get 2 more penalty strokes on top of that for failing to replay. So a 3-stroke total. That makes sense. Everybody there on that one?
But if it's a 30-foot putt, I don't get a serious breach.
That's right. Yeah. Good point. We're no longer considering that a wrong place. Yeah. So we don't have to figure out if it's serious or not, serious breach or not. That hit everything there on that's on there. I got deep. All right, so we've got a change here in terms of what the player has to report to the committee after the round. So, you know, I think David probably says this best and knows this best, but I think this rule is a small baby step towards, in the grand scheme of things, several years down the road of players not having to report to the committee at all. I think the ruling bodies are trying to get there, but for the time being, we do have you know, a good little adjustment. So in 2019, if you played from a wrong place and you went to correct your mistake by playing from the right place. So mark my ball on the green. It interferes. I move it out of the way for David to play. He plays. I put my ball back down. I fail to move it back. I make my stroke. So I play from the wrong place. And I realize, oh crap, you know, I forgot to move it back. So I put the ball back and make my stroke. I was supposed to report that to the committee. I had to let the committee know, look, I played from the wrong place. I've corrected my mistake, but I played from the wrong place. And the idea was, you know, the player doesn't get to determine what's a serious breach or not. That's the committee's job. So all wrong places that are corrected, let's run it by the committee. They'll make that the final determination. We've gotten rid of that in 2023. So you no longer have to report to the committee if you correct from a wrong place, as long as you don't intend to have 2 scores. We're not playing 2 balls here. So I'll throw another example out. Somebody hits their ball into a yellow penalty area. They think they can drop on the other side, and so they do. They drop the ball, they hit, they make a stroke. They played from the wrong place. Buddy says, hey, look, that's a yellow. You can't drop on that side. You gotta go back. You gotta go back and play. Okay, all right, I'll correct my mistake. So whether it's with that original ball, which is unlikely, but or another ball, you go back to the other side and you drop a ball where you're supposed to play from the right place, and then you finish out the hole. In 2019, you had to report that. In 2023, no longer. Player only intends to have one score. They've corrected their mistake. They're not required to report. The reporting requirement is still intact if you do play two balls when you're uncertain, when you intend to have two scores. You still need to report that to committee. The committee needs to sort out what you did, if what you did was right or wrong. And they're going to ultimately help you determine your score on that hole, which score actually stands. But in terms of correcting a wrong place, you don't have to report to the committee anymore. So yeah, bit of a, I don't know, somewhat minutiae, can be minutiae topic, but high level, that's where we are on that. So yes.
Something we talked about our staff, there isn't really a clear interpretation of or clarification of what is a serious breach. And, you know, you could argue that, you know, if you're behind a tree, you can only punch out, you drop out from the tree, you just dropping, not taking the playable, and you can now get 200 yards up there. We don't, you know, it could be a serious breach, it could not, but it's the only serious breaches, stroking distance, failing to do that, and green side of the yellow, or not following the yellow area. In general, I try to operate in general as much as I can. In this case.
Yeah, so I mean, so it is, and it's a difficult concept for committee members to work through, and we do have standards in terms of things to take into consideration. But David, as the guy that's got a bunch of committee experience in making these sorts of determinations, what
I like
to
to
say?
see there's clear, what we kind of in general say to cover 95%.
Yeah.
There is not a clear black and white. What the USGA and the RNA have agreed on are those very vague standards that are in that clarification. They can't get any further than that because they can't agree on anything further than that. And basically what they've done is they've kicked the can down the road to the committee and said, you guys do what you think is right. You think the players gained a significant advantage? And one committee and one set of competitions might decide that the player who got out from behind a tree, that was a serious breach, and another committee might decide, heck, for a penalty stroke, they could have gotten there with unplayable. So it's, you know, it's quantifiable and so forth, not a serious breach. And the USGA and the RNA are not going to tell one committee that they were wrong and the other committee they were right, because they can't agree on it themselves. Right? So you just got to do the best job you can. It would be great if we could get rid of serious breach, but think of a situation in which I chip the ball off the tee, 5 feet, pick my ball up, ball at rest move, and I replace it on the lip of the hole and tap it in for a 2-stroke wrong place penalty, for an easy par on par 4. If we got rid of serious breach, we'd have to have something else to fall back on. Maybe rule 1.2 or something, but well, just something that's so. It would be great to get rid of serious breach and deal with it somewhere else, but that's not where we are right now.
Yeah, well said. Embedded ball relief. So we've got a minor change here and a minor procedural change here. So when the ball is, start with 2019, when the ball is embedded, which means any part of the ball is below the surface of the ground. Player gets free relief, which is 1 club length from the spot directly behind where the ball is embedded. But in certain very rare situations, And the relief area also had to be, where the person had to drop the ball in the relief area. Ball is embedded in the general area, you gotta drop it in the general area. In very rare instances, there was a possibility for a ball to be embedded. Think of in the lip of a bunker, where we've got sort of a holes that way, sort of finger this way, so the back of the bunker kind of comes in like this. And we've got a bunker, it embeds into that finger. And if you measured one club length from the spot right behind the ball, no closer to the hole, there was no relief area for the player to drop in. So if there wasn't any relief area for the player to drop the ball in, the player was stuck. They couldn't take relief. They had to play the ball as it lies or take unplayable. Again, very rare. I don't think it really ever truly happened. So this is a solution to something that, hopefully will happen. But so the change now is that the spot right behind the ball has to be in the general area. So even in that case of that bunker with that finger, the reference point in 2019 could have been in the bunker. You take that same situation in 2023, that reference point now has to be in the general area. So we're going to take a similar procedure to what we do with nearest point of complete relief. So we're going to find the nearest point, no closer to the hole, where we can put that reference point that's in the general area. In many cases, we won't have to go very far, but in some cases we might. Another good example to think about is yellow penalty area. So imagine this edge right here is the backside of a yellow penalty area that we're trying to hit over. And the ball embeds right there. It's not in the penalty area, but if you put your tee in the ground directly behind the ball, the tee is touching the line. The tee is in the penalty area. So we'd have to work our way either left or right, our nearest point, so that tee, our reference point, is in the general area. And the concept behind that is this way, when the reference point is in the general area, it guarantees that the player can now get relief. Even if it's just a tiny sliver, that player, because of where the reference point is, can drop the ball, it can graze that part of the general area. It's not going to come to rest in the general area, so you drop it again, place, it won't stay. Now we hunt and we find our ball. So interesting development there, but I think so. Do we have? Yeah. So here's actually a good clip. Tiger Woods going through something similar.
Here's what's going to the face ended.
He's better from there.
He's bringing a real official in here.
They get any worse at this point.
So the ball's not touching any sand, so it's not in the bunker. So the ball is embedded in the general area, so he does get relief for embedded ball. We take the spot right behind that ball, directly down. It's still in the bunker in this situation.
That was pretty straightforward.
But Tiger here still is going to get one club length from that reference point that was in the bunker right there.
Above the sand is part of the general area. So therefore, when the ball's embedded, find the reference point directly behind where the ball's embedded, measure within the club length, drop it, and then shade our test from USGA and our officials to get fair time. Back in point.
So in 2023, what we're saying is that reference point that was in the bunker, now, since it has to be in the general area, we're just going to slide over a little bit. And so that reference point is now in the general area. Then we use that to measure our one club length for embedded ball.
Your example of being in the finger of the bumper, you may either go backwards, sideways.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna work that out. It's just like the nearest,
Closest point of relief, if that's.
right? Yeah, this is the nearest point, find the nearest point. So it could be left, it could be right, it could be all the way back, depending on the shape. We're just gonna follow the nearest point of complete relief procedure there to figure that out. Just some overhead shots here, sort of illustrating what just happened there with Tiger. So, we've got some clarifications that go into detail on this and sort of talk about this even more, but, you know, players allowed to take relief from embedded ball. There are situations where the reference point might not be in the general area. So in Tiger's case, it was right there in the sand. When this occurs, we're going to find the nearest spot in the general area. So what would have been right here now in 2023, we're just going to slide over, stick it in the ground in the general area, and then measure from there. And then that's our reference point. That's what we use to determine our relief area. Yeah, in most cases, it's going to be pretty close, but in that finger bunker, it could be some distance away. We just got to figure that out. Got to go through the motion to figure out where that is. Yeah, right, left, or backwards. So now we're going to slide on over. Again, just pointing out here the limits on the relief area for embedded ball. The ball is embedded in the general area, so we've got to drop it in the general area. We get 1 club length from that reference point, which is right there, but you know, we're not dropping it in that bunker. The ball lands in the general area and then rolls into the bunker. Got to drop it again. Got to see that motion. Okay. David said, I'm going to give a stab at this one. So that's what I'm going to do. So if the ball is potentially lost, if you're searching for your ball, you got 3 minutes to find it. If you don't find it within 3 minutes, the status of that ball changes from in play, changes to wrong ball, gone, done. A ball is not coming back to life. But there are situations, though, when the clock stops, and that is if somebody finds a ball that could be yours. So David and I are playing, and I think I'm 30 yards up because I tagged it. He knows that I don't hit it that far, so he's looking 30 yards shorter. And we're at 2 minutes and 50 seconds at this point. I'm looking for my ball. And then David screams, "Hey, I think I found it right here." Clock stops.
Clock doesn't stop.
The clock, you're right. The clock doesn't stop. It is going to continue rolling, but I have a reasonable amount of time to get to that location. So let's say it takes, what I said, 2:50, 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Let's say it takes 20 seconds for me to walk 30 yards. That'd be pretty slow, but just go with me here. So now I get to the ball and we're at 3 minutes and 10 seconds. At that point, when I reach the spot where I could identify it, I then have a reasonable amount of time to actually identify it. And if I can't identify it within that reasonable amount of time, I've got a problem. But there's a couple more variations to this. So I get there. David finds it at 2:50. I get over there within a reasonable amount of time. It's now 3:10. So I'm there, I'm at the spot, but David says, "Oh, your ball is up in the tree." And so I'm looking up there and I can't tell. I'm not able to tell. But hang on, can we call the rules official over? Get a rover. They have some binoculars. They bring them out. Let's take a look. We saw actually Ricky doing this on tour at some point in time. The problem with 2019 and this reasonable amount of time to identify your ball once you get to it is there wasn't any parameters on it. You know, is it reasonable
for somebody who sees a ball that they think is theirs, they can't physically identify it. So they call a rules official over and, you know, we wait a minute or two, 3 minutes, 4 minutes for them to bring out the binoculars, field glasses, what he referred to it. You know, is that reasonable? And the ruling bodies sort of got together and said, well, you know, we need to put a time limit on this. And they came up with 1 minute. So in the same scenario, let's go back here. David finds my ball at 250. The clock's going to continue to run until I get there. I'm now there at 310. Once I get to that point, once I'm there, I now have 1 more minute to identify it. If that's enough time for me to call a rules official over to bring the binoculars so that I can identify it, I'm in good standing. But if not, it's done. I get 1 more minute. So there's a, do we go into the clarification here? So the clarification is addressing the fact, or is addressing this reasonable amount of time. We've now said that reasonable amount of time is 1 minute. Once you get to the ball, once you get to that location where you could potentially identify it. Did I stray too far off here?
No, yeah, I think you touched all the bases.
Okay. So David puts this a lot more eloquently than I do, but he sort of talks about it in terms of three timelines. So you have your original 3 minutes. You also have a reasonable amount of time to get to the ball if you're not in a location to be able to identify it. And then once you're at that point, you have a minute to look.
Needed to identify.
A minute to identify. But the key here, I think that the key takeaway here is that this minute to identify the ball, even if it's beyond the 3 minutes, only comes into play when the ball has been found and needs to be identified towards the end of the 3 minute search. So we have a minute. This clarification is giving us a guaranteed minute to identify the ball, but it's only going to kick in if the ball is found towards the end of that 3 minute search time. So if I find my ball, what I think is my ball in the tree after 15 seconds, I have till the end of the 3 minutes to identify it. If I can't, it's a wrong ball. It's lost. It's not going to give me any extra time. It's only going to guarantee that I have at least that 1 minute, which I already have in the original 3 minutes. But if I find that ball in the tree and it's within the final minute of the 3 minutes, so it's 2 minutes and 10 seconds, I'm now going to get a minute more to identify it, even if that takes me beyond 3 minutes. I think I started to close the loop at the end there.
Wait a minute. Is the extra minute arbitrarily kick in at 2 minutes and 0.1 second? Or you're talking, it doesn't kick in until the final 10 seconds of. So where does it kick in? It is, you say it doesn't kick in at the beginning of the 3 minutes. I mean, are you getting that finite that it's two minutes and 0.1 of a second? Then you get the extra minute?
You don't get the whole minute. They would say, you know, get a minute.
You get a
So
minute
2
from that.
minutes and 1 second, you would get to go to 3 minutes.
1 second.
You guaranteed 1 minute minimum. So found it at 2:15, you got to 3:15.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's like this doesn't apply until 2 minutes and 1 second.
Right, it doesn't apply.
I think that's what,
Yeah.
That was my. West side.
No, you understand.
But you have to find a chip, you didn't get to the ball.
Maybe.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let me just clarify my own mind about what we've got. Your situation, it's 2 minutes, 50 seconds, and David finds the ball.
Mhm.
You have already started back to the tee with another ball in play. Riding in a golf cart in most cases. But you're 125 yards back up that way, so you turn the golf cart, come back. That 1 minute starts when I get back.
When you get back.
Okay, so then, so we could be all the way out to 3 minutes and 35 seconds or something before I get back in the car. It's up there, now we got a minute.
Right.
Okay, so now we could go all the way out to 4 minutes and 35 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's what's smart.
that's not the way it's explained in a 4-day rule school.
Yes, it was. You just didn't understand.
There you have it.
Well, we know. So you find your ball at 250 that you think it could be yours. And we know that the clock is going to stop in that situation. So you're locked in at 250 for now. When you take your reasonable amount of time to get the ball and you realize that it's not your ball, you have 10 more seconds.
No, I'm confused
No?
because he didn't stop the clock.
No. Bad luck has to start somewhere, and this is one of the places it starts. You had 3 minutes to find your ball, and we gave you some extra time because the ball was identified. It turned out not to be your ball, but you had your 3 minutes.
So that gets included in your search time.
Oh, because your search time, it still goes when you're going back to the tee.
Once you hit 3 minutes, this extended period of time only applies to this one ball that's been found. You get the extra 10 seconds to find any golf ball you can find in that 10 seconds, but you get extra time to find this one that you got at.
The clock didn't stop.
The clock doesn't stop. How many of you have done this? I've seen lots of officials do this. We found a ball, click, and you stop the clock. Don't stop the clock. The clock runs.
So while you're.
I saw a tour official do that. Click.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, it's not right.
While you were trying to identify said ball and tree, somebody else locates another ball.
Your opportunity to find that ball expired at 3 minutes. Wasn't found within 3 minutes.
You don't get any additional time to go look at that
Your
ball.
time expired to find that ball at 3 minutes. It was found after the.
The moral of the story is.
It happened.
That would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So, decent stab, maybe. No, we went kind of deep on this
Hey,
last night.
This is a. Remember I told you before that the mind can handle 3 things, but it's not handling these 3 things very well because there's just too many moving parts.
So, okay, all right. Well, that wraps up the playing the ball aspect of the changes that we were going to cover today. So now we're going to segue to advice and help, which is everything that we're going to talk about today is going to be found in 10.2b. So rule 10 is an interesting rule. It covers a couple different things. It covers preparing for a stroke, what you're allowed and not allowed to do. It covers actually making the stroke. It covers getting advice and help from others, including your caddy. But the underlying principle here is that golf is a game of skill. It's a game of judgment. It's a game of personal challenge. And while a player is allowed to get help, either from others or from their caddy, there are certain limitations in place so that we ensure that the player confronts these challenges of playing the game. So I'm gonna kick this off here with a little clip from one of our championships. And I don't know if there's gonna be audio because of how I
Figure out what line he's gonna take. Honestly, he's got a blind second.
I just want to be like stand up there. Yeah, there you go.
Flags, you wanna go a little bit right of that?
Okay, I got it. I got it.
I mean, you need to be, that's a good friend, Jim Magruder. Right of that.
I got it.
Little bit here.
Fine.
All right, so great dialogue there. Under the 2023 rules, how many penalty strokes does that player incur in that series of events there? Okay, just making sure you're still with me. The answer is 0. There's nothing wrong there. It's just a good example of a player getting help from their caddy. This is the types of help that we're talking about. It's okay to get help. But with respect to line of play, so we have a situation here, you know, the player says, hey, look, can you go stand right there and show me where my line of play should be? Where should I hit this thing? That's not a problem. The big change in 2023 is that we're no longer going to allow the setting down of objects. In 2019, if you were anywhere except the putting green, it was okay to set an object down to indicate the line of play, as long as it was removed, the stroke was made. We've now taken that restriction from the putting green and applied it everywhere. So it doesn't matter where your ball is, you are no longer allowed to have an object set down to indicate your line of play. So you can see that water bottle there. I mean, this is technically a breach of 2019 too as well, but because he's on the putting green, Arnie there. But and maybe for some other reasons too, but we've got an object set down there. You know, we're no longer allowed to do that to indicate line of play. And again, even if Arnie was playing a shot from fairway, we're not allowed to do this. So no longer setting objects down. I don't know if I have it. Maybe I do. Okay. So yeah, pretty simple as that. We're not going to set objects down anymore. Now, the first 2 sections of this rule talk about line of play. And then we also, when we get into the third section here, 10.2b3, we also talk about setting objects down again, but this is for different reasons now. We're not allowed to set objects down to help with aiming or taking a stance or other directional information. So here we've got a player that's set a club down to either help with aiming or how they want to align their stance. They take their stance, make their stroke, and that's going to be a problem.
So these cannot be undone. And once I put the object there,
It's yeah, and I think I've got that in here too, but we've gotten this a lot. You know, what does it exactly mean to set an object down? This is actually an internal definition in the rule book now, so we have clarified what that means. It means that the object is in contact with the ground, and the player is not touching that object. So clearly, we've got this club here; it's on the ground. Player's not touching it or not holding it. That player has set an object down for these purposes that would not be allowed. And as also we get, you know, is it okay for somebody to do something like this? You know, whether they use it to see where their feet are aiming or perhaps even put it across their shoulders to double check, you know, where they are. They're not setting the object down. So it's okay.
So go back to the previous photo. He's taken two clubs with him. And he hadn't decided which club to use. And so he's, I'm gonna hit the fairway wood, and he takes his hybrid. And he just kind of tosses it down. But it coincidentally is parallel to his feet. And could be construed as helping him line up.
I think at that point, we need to talk to the player. We need to ask the player, what are you doing? What's your
Why
intent?
you did that.
Why did you do that? Did you know that it was, in a position to potentially help you? That's something I think we need to talk to the player about. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, well, what the rule says is that must not set an object down to provide such help. So you need to put the object down for that purpose. This player threw his club down not for that purpose. And it wound up in a place where it could help. The rule doesn't apply. The penalty in the rule doesn't apply because the object wasn't set down for that purpose.
Well, set.
No.
Set and drop.
It wasn't put down for that purpose. Why was the object put down? That's what Jay said. You got to talk to the player. Why'd you do that? Well, I wasn't going to use it. I just tossed it down. It wasn't set down for that purpose. The rule penalizes you for setting it down for that reason.
So he just happened to drop it in a place that was convenient to help him with his alignment. He's gonna get a
If he
pass.
does that on multiple strokes, you might have a question. Just one stroke.
Yeah.
Or it's only one ball. As long as they're holding the putter.
Yeah.
If they let go of the putter on the green.
So sort of morphing into some self-standing putters, I think maybe, but anyway, we're gonna get to that anyway. But no, if you set the object down for that purpose.
Set down. Horizontal plumb. Because that, good players do it. As long as they're holding it, they're okay. As soon as they let it go, if they let it go, we have a problem. Yeah, so the problem.
So the player's not touching it, then we have a problem.
Right. Question. The concern is this, that says the player is not touching the object. So if he sets it down there like that, okay, he gets the penalty. Okay. If his feet's touching the object, he gets an additional penalty for building standards.
You're gonna get a quantity discount on that.
More likely, yeah. We have another pointing attention to the fact that there are other similar actions that we're going to treat as setting an object down. And some examples would be a player drawing a line in the sand or in the dew, as in this picture right here. That's going to be the same thing. We're gonna treat that as setting an object down. It's not allowed. And if you do so, set an object down or otherwise draw a line in the sand to help with aiming, taking the stance, or swinging, it's going to get the general penalty and you can't avoid it. It's done. Once it's done, it's done. Even if you pick up that club and remove it, even if you wipe away the line in the sand or dew, once it's done, it's done. So I think David might have a little bit more insight on this one, but we do now specifically call out self-standing putters, and for consistent reasons. We just talked about how you're not allowed to set an object down to help in certain ways. that is effectively what a self-standing putter does. You can set it down, go back behind it, see where you're aiming. I mean, there's a lot of help that's being done there. However, we've got some clarifications now. We're about delaying this. This is not going to go into effect until 2025. So you know,
Why are you laying that?
If you remember with anchoring, which was not an equipment rule, it was a use of equipment rule. There was a 2-year, there was an announcement that this will become a breach of the rules. And there's a 2-year building period. And it was pointed out to us that this is the same sort of thing. That there's a precedent that when we make an announcement of a change that involves equipment, that involves something that we previously were allowed to do with this piece of equipment, clearly by rule, that we need to give it a 2-year equipment build-in period. And you're also going to see that if the ball model local rule, the end of the 6-month comment period and then consideration after that is decided to go into effect, that there will be a 2-year build-in period for that as well. So that if the ball reduction, distance reduction thing goes into effect, it will also have the same 2-year build-in period. And so this got published in the book before everything had been finalized, and the governing body realized that, oops, you know, we have to apply this kind of 2-year precedent that we've applied elsewise. So there's the reason why.
Any kind of equipment change from here on out, because we did it with the anchor.
This is not an equipment. No, this is not an equipment.
So it's not.
This is how you use a piece of equipment. All right, so that, but we're also gonna do the 2 years with the ball roll back as well. So that this is probably gonna become a norm for especially products that are in the market and uses of equipment that is in the market, that now the rug is being pulled out from underneath that piece of equipment as it was designed, that there will be this 2-year period.
Did we do that with the green reading material?
We negotiated the green material very good.
So differing equipment maybe handled.
Why did they even let it in the first place? That's even a longer story, and I'm not gonna go into it.
But different equipment may be handled differently going forward. But the self-standing putter will still be a conforming club, you just can't use it.
Starting in January of 2025, you can't let go of it and walk away from it because you've set an object down. Until 2025, you can still do it.
I'm trying to sell it all day.
I'm also not aware that anybody got sued over this, but this might have had something to do with us not getting sued.
Sure. Yeah, that would make more sense.
All right. Might have.
and finally here, to wrap up advice and help. We've got situations, again, involving either caddy or partner. The change here, you know, we do have a new name for this place behind the player. It's called the restricted area. And we really just, you know, again, a player, one of the skills that a player needs to use to play this game is to be able to line up where they need or want to hit it. And the thought is that
You know, we don't need people helping us, standing behind us and helping us do that. That's something the player needs to take on themselves and on their own. So we had, you know, some clarifications and whatnot that talked about this and built in it. It was all sort of redrafted and brought together, pushed into the main rule book. But again, the main concept here and probably one of the, I mean, what I would say, one of the most commonly breached rules involving a caddy or partner is probably this one.
Yes.
Definitely a video I'm working on. It's trying to come out very soon.
That also applies now in floorball for the stroke the partner is going to make, which I think most people, you know, a lot of people play floorball. You may want to look at that. Because I've had to stop it a couple of times.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Shane, does this also apply to advice givers?
Yeah.
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 We've got a lot of assistant coaches out there. That are pushing it into this all the time.
So I don't know if I have so we've got, so one thing also I will point out, about this is there's, you know, it's okay for the caddy to stand behind the player as they're working through the shot, preparing for the shot, looking at where they want to hit it, looking at where they want to aim. Okay, but there's a period of time where this caddy or partner needs to get out of the way. And that is when the player begins to move their foot into position to take their stance. Okay, so it's at that point in time, you know, the restricted area has been activated. We need to get out of there so that we're no longer in there. There's also a clarification though that addresses a similar action that I think is designed to prevent anybody from possibly circumventing this rule. So, you know, imagine a situation where, you know, I'm lined up like this and, you know, I'm 2 inches from the ball and I'm sitting right here. You know, I got David standing behind me. Hey, check me out. Am I okay? Am I good? I haven't addressed the ball yet, but all I have to do is now my feet are in the stance that I'm going to use to make the stroke. In a situation like that, we're going to treat that as the player's already taken their stance. You can't sort of sneak one by the rules there, but that's the only other thing I'd point out. And then I've got one more thing here. So got an interesting concept in match play because it's just 1v1 or 2v2. It's just you guys in the course. Nobody else matters. You can sort of kind of do things the way that maybe don't necessarily align with the rules, or that's the rules allows, as long as you are not doing it deliberately. And one of these interesting concepts in match play is that if I see David breach a rule, I have the choice. I have the opportunity to just ignore it and not call it on him. You know, because the only person that hurts is me. And so if I see him take a practice swing in the bunker and, you know, I know that's a penalty, I don't have to say anything. I can just let it ride. What we found out was that our friends across the pond, the RNA, you know, we had a slightly different interpretation of what it meant to agree. So in that same situation, if David made that practice swing that touched the sand in the bunker, and I said, hey, David, you can't do that, but don't worry about it. I'm not going to call a penalty on you. Just don't do it again. We had a different interpretation of what an agreement meant. The RNA sort of thought that there was no agreement made there. That was just the player making their own decision on what they wanted to do. We had a slightly different view, but we put our heads together and said, all right, we'll roll with what your interpretation was. So now what we previously said was not allowed was, you know, me being able to acknowledge out loud to my opponent that they breached a rule, but not call anything on it.
that was formerly not allowed. Now that's okay. Now we're in a position where if a player in their sole decision decides not to impose a penalty on somebody, it's okay. And you can acknowledge it out loud. You can say, hey, David, what you just did breached the rule. That's not allowed, but it's okay. I'm not going to call it on you. Or you can call it on, that's fine. But if you choose not to call it on them, it's not an agreement because it was my sole decision not to impose that penalty. That's why it's not listed as a change anywhere, because we sort of just had these slightly differing opinions. And then we just said, okay, we'll go with, we'll follow suit with how you've been applying this rule. I'll probably just leave it at that unless anybody has any questions. But the big takeaway is if it's your decision only not to call a penalty on it, it's not an agreement. And it's okay. Everybody's okay.
What happens if the next hole you do it? And David says, well, you didn't call that on me last, so I'm not going to call it. I mean, this is a trap. This is help. That point is that an agreement. No.
I'll tell you what an agreement is. Mark, I'm not gonna call this on you. And
Let's
and
agree.
all right, I'm not gonna call this on you, but now you own. And you acknowledge, okay, that's it.
Okay, I see the difference. I mean,
Yeah.
it's subtle.
Yes.
He's created an agreement.
So I don't know. The big takeaway again for me is that now I'm going to enjoy just being able to acknowledge out loud to my opponent that I might have done something because it's maybe a little bit of gamesmanship.
That's good for the rules of golf, I think. This is, you're teaching them.
Sure. Yeah, because previously when we were required to wait, until the next stroke was made on the next hole, maybe it never came up again. Not even 19th hole, so it is a good learning opportunity. But
Then a game where you call penalties on yourself. Why would you volunteer out loud? I'm not going to charge you penalties for the player can say, I'm getting free. When match play on you announce to your opponent when you take a penalty. What if the old player didn't see him do it? Isn't the guy in the bunker supposed to say, I took a penalty stroke?
Yep.
Yeah, but David
And
didn't
the
know.
failure to do that is breach of the rule. Okay. Which I could then say to you, but I'm gonna overlook. Now that's my unilateral decision. You play by the rules, you told me about it. Telling you. Not going to fight.
Can it also follow the same basics and see the play as first?
No, look, overlooking is something that is allowed in match play. It's just allowed.
The guy's taking a spin.
You are playing by the rules when you overlook something. We'll say you can do.
as the rules say. But yeah, that's gonna wrap up this section of the changes. So I think.
Let me just go quickly through these last couple of little things and then we'll take a break, okay? So 4 things in here. For anyone who has done any Stableford or maximum score or par boat, there were a whole bunch of penalties, club penalties and so on, where points had to be adjusted and so on. And the whole bunch of reporting to the committee about those things and those forms of play. And all of those things in the 23 rules have been wiped away. And what you do is just applying normal stroke play penalties to your score for the hole. For all of these things that you used to have to report. And that then factors into how many points you get or don't get. A great simplification in all three of those forms of play. In rules 22 and 23, when we talk about a partner standing in the restricted area when the player is playing. If you're standing in the restricted area to help the player with aiming, then my standing there gets my partner, the player, the penalty. But if I'm not standing there for that purpose, if I'm standing there to help myself so that I can see the break, I'm not allowed to stand a new addition to the restricted areas. I'm not allowed to stand there to help myself either. And then if I do that, Jay doesn't get the penalty, I get the penalty.
If it helps you both, then you both get it.
Yeah, although I fail to see how Jay playing his stroke can help Jay. But it helps me. But maybe, yeah, certainly have to filter that through. Okay, so there's that change. So it prohibits the partner from standing in the restricted area for another reason. That partner's next stroke. Advice givers, all of the restrictions in Rule 10.2b4, standing in the restricted area and all these other things apply to advice givers now as well. So that's another change there. And then the modifications for players with certain physical disabilities, with certain, not just physical disabilities, players with disabilities, no longer a model local rule. They are part of the rules of golf. I talked about that at the very beginning. Right. So there we go. There we've kind of hit on all of the major changes and some of the things that weren't even listed in the major changes. Right. All right, everybody, let me have you take your seats again and let me do something hard.
Let's get all the days to back.
How many of you have, by the way, how many of you have this app? It's called Air Horn. That's novel.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. It's not loud. Yeah, it's not loud enough for you. All right, let's. I want to talk about status of the ball. And for those of you who have been to our workshops and heard our recordings of this, this is a new version of this. You folks are hearing this for the first time. It might be a disaster. It might be just brilliant. I'm hoping it's the latter. But it grew out of a conversation that I had with one of our newer employees, Ryan Farb, who many of you may already be aware of. You may have gone to one of his workshops or heard him do teaching the rules of golf virtually or in the last couple of years. And in the workshops for several years, built this presentation where I said there are 4 statuses of the ball. It's in play, it's substituted, it's lost, or it's not in play. And Ryan came in and said, you know, there are really only 2 statuses. It's either in play or it's not in play. And everything else is just a mechanism that changes the ball from one status to the other. Now, when it's not in play, we also call that thing a wrong ball, and you get penalized if you hit that thing that's not in play, that wrong ball, right? But I'm going to talk about this set of rules right here and definitions. The 4 definitions are there, but there are really only 2 statuses of the golf ball that we're concerned about. Is it in play or is it not in play? And then rule 6.3, which talks about you got to hole out with the same ball played from the tee, except when you don't have to do it. A big section on what substitution means, and substitution's a complicated subject. a section on what happens if you play a wrong ball and what are the penalties for that. And a section on, yeah, you're only allowed to have one ball in play at a time, but if a couple of times in the rules, you're actually allowed to be playing two balls at once. And how do we deal with that? And correcting mistakes in substituting, replacing, dropping, and placing the ball is also another way to change the status of a golf ball. So I want to start with a little story about the dynamic nature of in play and out of play that many of you probably are aware of, but maybe, not so specifically aware, right? So let me just, any hole on a golf course. And this was a story of, and this is an embellishment of a story that I heard Craig Winter, who's the chair of our department, head of our department, the rules department, talk about a number of years ago. And I thought it was brilliant. He said, do you realize that every hole of golf you play, you start and finish with a wrong ball? Every hole you play, you start with a wrong ball and finish with a wrong ball. All right, listen to the story. Here I am on the second tee, and I tee up a ball that I took out of my pocket. When I'm between the play of holes, I have no ball in play. Every ball in the world is a wrong ball. No ball in play. And I take one of those balls that's not in play and I put it on a tee. That doesn't turn it into a ball in play. What turns it into a ball in play? I make a stroke at it from inside the teeing area and magically it turns into my ball in play. Okay? Now I have a ball in play. Good. Great. I go find my drive and it's in the left top. And interestingly enough, it's in an area of ground under repair. So I decide to take relief from the ground under repair. So I pick my ball up. And what am I holding in my hand? A ball that's not in play. And I figure out my nearest point of complete relief. And I determine my club length from my nearest point of complete relief, and I pick a nice spot, and I drop that, and I let go. I'm holding this ball that's not in play in my hand, and when I let go of it, it turns it into a ball in play. And I said, lucky enough, if I'm lucky enough for it to come to rest in the relief area, I play my next shot with that ball. If it doesn't come to rest in the relief area, it rolls outside the relief area, is it in play or not?
Yep.
What made it go out of play? It's in play. It's just in play in a wrong place. When your ball, write this down. When your ball in play is in a wrong place, if your ball in play is in a wrong, if your ball is in a wrong place, that means it's in play. You can't play from a wrong place with anything other than a ball in play. If it's not in play, it's a wrong ball, right? You don't get penalized for playing a wrong ball when it doesn't stay in the relief area, do you? You get penalized for playing a ball in play that's not where it's supposed to be. All right, so it rolls out of here, okay? It's in play, but I pick it up. Now it's a wrong ball in my hand, isn't it? I drop it again. That still doesn't come to rest in the relief area. I pick it up, it's a wrong ball. And now I have to place it where it hit the ground on the second drop in the relief area. And as soon as I let go of it, I've got a ball in play again. All right, good. Now I can play my second shot. I hit my second shot and it goes into a wooded area and it might be lost. So I declare and play a provisional ball. Is the provisional ball in play? And the answer is no. And is the provisional ball a wrong ball? The answer is no. Provisional ball is a ball that we have to figure out what the status of it is. But until we figure out whether it's a ball in play or a wrong ball, it's just a ball that exists in between those two statuses. And my colleague, Brian Farb, calls that a ball that's in the twilight zone. All right. So I hit this provisional ball down the middle of the fairway. And after 3 minutes, well, now, is my original ball still a ball in play in the woods?
Yes.
Yeah, and then I start looking for it. And after 3 minutes, I haven't found it. And what happens to my provisional ball, or my original ball? It just turned into a wrong ball. And what just turned into my ball in play? Provisional ball. So the 3-minute search time for my original ball when I played a provisional ball does two things once we go past 3 minutes. The original ball turns into a wrong ball, and the provisional ball is not a provisional ball anymore, it's my ball in play. And it's my ball in play under stroke and distance. So I played the second shot with this one. And the third shot with this one, plus a penalty stroke, so it lies 4. Is it in play? Provisional ball. Now it's not a provisional ball anymore. It's stopped being a Twilight Zone ball, become a ball in play. Well, I knocked that one on the putting green. And I walk up to the putting green, put my point behind it and lift it. And what do I have in my hand? A ball that's not in play. And I replace it on the putting green and let go. I put it down the putting green, and let go of it. And what happens? Turns into a ball in play. I now hit my ball lies 4, right? I'll hit my 5th shot, my first putt, it winds up 3 feet from the hole. And I mark it and I rotate it to get my line. My cheater line, right there it is, lined up. What's the status of this ball that I'm rotating? If you look in rule 14.1 under the preface to 14.1, it gives you examples of how a ball gets lifted. And it says rotating a ball is the equivalent of lifting a ball. So while it's being rotated, what's the status of it? It's not in play. But as soon as I let go of it, I've replaced it and it's now back in play. And I tap it in. And what do I kick out of the hole? A ball that's not in play. A wrong ball. So I start every hole with a wrong ball, and I end every hole by taking a wrong ball out of the hole. All right. Who's on first? Who's up now? This is, look, this is the dynamic. This is how easily golf balls go in and out of play. We do it all the time and think nothing of it. You don't even pay attention to it. All right. So this presentation, we're going to talk about the 2 primary statuses. It's either in play or it's not in play. If it's not in play, it's a wrong ball if you hit it, and that's a problem. In order to have a score, you have to be playing a ball in play. You can only accumulate talent strokes by hitting a ball in play. You can accumulate penalty strokes by hitting this thing. But the stroke you make doesn't count at this thing. That ball is not in play. All right. So what we now need to look at is what are all of the ways in which a ball that's in play turns into a ball that's not in play? The common ones are I lift it and that takes it out of play. I hit it out of bounds. Now it's out of play. I've searched for more than 3 minutes. It's out of play. I've substituted another ball for my ball in play. I just gave you another one in my story. I played a provisional ball and the 3 minutes turned my provisional ball into a ball in play. So it's all of these things, etc. Sometimes when I cause a ball to go out of play, I can get it back in play in that location. Other times, I'm not allowed to get it back in play at that location. 3 minutes has passed and my original ball has turned into a wrong ball and my provisional ball has become my ball in play. And then Jay says, David, I just found your ball. I can't get that ball back in play at that location. I lift my ball from the putting green, turn it into a wrong ball, turn it into a ball not in play, and then replace it. I can get that ball back in play. So sometimes you can get it back in play and sometimes you can't at that location. Substituting is interesting. Because substituting, when you've got a ball in play on the golf course and you substitute another golf ball, you put the other golf ball in play and turn the one that was in play into a wrong ball, into a ball that's not in play. So substitution can do two things at once. Other times, substitution just does one thing. I pick this ball up, turned it into a wrong ball, and put another ball back on the golf course and turned that one into play. I didn't, the ball that I picked up, the original ball that I picked up, I made that not in play before I substituted. So substitution sometimes can do two things simultaneously, or you've already taken the original ball out of play for some other reason. All right. Then we want to look at, how do I take a ball that's not in play and turn it into play, a ball that is in play? Well, I make a stroke from the teeing area. That puts a ball in play, doesn't it? Or I replace a ball, or I drop a ball, or I place a ball. You all know what the difference between replacing and placing is? Replacing is putting a ball back where it was either lifted from or moved from. Placing is part of a relief procedure. It's going somewhere new. I dropped a couple of times and both times came to rest outside of the relief area. And now I'm placing a ball in play at some new location on the golf course. Right? So there's that. What do you do if you play a wrong ball? And then while you can only have one ball in play at a time, there are a bunch of times, and I've trotted one in front of you, provisional ball, where you could be playing two different golf balls. And how does that work and so forth? So Rule 6.3 starts with this wonderful progression of strokes made from the teeing area to the putting green and into the hole. And you're normally required to do that with the same ball until the hole is completed. And you'll get a penalty stroke if you make a stroke at a ball that's not in play, a wrong ball, or if you make a stroke at a ball in play that's been substituted when you weren't allowed to substitute it. But at least you'll be able to finish the hole with this one. This will not help you finish the hole, unless in the odd case that a committee member told you that that was the right thing to do, and then the committee just has to swallow hard and grit its teeth and allow you to score with the wrong ball. But that requires committee error. So here's the basic tenet here. You can only have one ball in play at a time, but there are lots of times during a play of a hole when you have no ball in play. No ball. And between holes, you never have a ball in play. And when you have no ball in play, every ball in the world's a wrong ball. Every ball in the world's out of play. We're all sitting in this room. Every ball in the world, whether we own it or not, is not in play right now. So here are our two primary statuses. Strokes count when you play, when you hit those balls that are in play. And you can't score with this ball. And in fact, the physical stroke that you make at that wrong ball, that ball that's not in play, doesn't count as a stroke in your score. You just get penalized. So let's look at the definition of in play. A ball first becomes in play when you start a hole by making a stroke from inside the teeing area. Got it? Making a stroke at a ball not in play from the teeing area is one of the many mechanisms that puts a ball into play. Then there's this interesting little outlier in match play, where if I tee it up outside the teeing area and make a stroke at it, and my opponent doesn't cancel the stroke, I put a ball in play. So there's an interesting little outlier of a mechanism, right? In match play, if I start the hole from outside the teeing area and I snipe it into the trees, Jay is happy as all can be to not cancel that stroke and have me go into the trees and find it and play it out of the trees. So this is an interesting little wrinkle in match play. It's some years it's worth a point on our 100-question exam. So it's a good one to know, but it's almost never going to happen. It's a real out of the ordinary mechanism, but it's a mechanism that turns a ball into play. All right. And the ball remains in play until you hold it. Once you hold it, it's now out of play. The hole's over. You're between the play of holes. And notice I'm doing this red versus green thing back and forth to highlight how these things change. And a ball remains in play. It hasn't been holed yet. If I put a ball in play, it remains in play, except in these 4 cases, and there are more cases, but here are the big 4 that take the ball that's in play and turn it into a ball that's not in play. Lifting it. That takes it out of play, not in play. On the putting green, I'm allowed to lift, and Rule 14.4 tells me clearly that when a player's ball in play is lifted from the course, the ball is no longer in play. So there's our validation of that. When my ball in play becomes lost, it's not in play. When I hit my ball out of bounds, when it comes to rest out of bounds, if I hit a ball that flies over out of bounds, it's in play the whole time. If I hit a ball and it rolls into out of bounds, as long as it's still moving, it's still in play, but as soon as it comes to rest, out of play. Right? So lost. Status of the ball, not found in 3 minutes. And a ball does not become lost because you said it was lost, because you declared it as lost. Finally have this in the rules somewhere. Never mind, guys, I'm declaring it lost. Jay's going to make a video on this one because this one's a bar bet. Right? Okay, ball comes to rest out of bounds. I got a little ahead of myself. Ball comes to rest out of bounds. There's another one of the big 4 that turns a ball in play into a ball that's not in play. And then when another ball has been substituted for it. So here's the original ball in play, and Jay just dropped a substituted ball, which turned that one into play and turned that one into not in play. So if I substitute for my ball in play, I've turned my original ball in play into a ball that's not in play. Now let's talk about substitution, because substitution's complicated. And this is true even when I've done something in substitution that I'm not allowed to do. Here's a player dropping from shoulder height. Has this player turned the drop ball into a ball in play? Tell me why not. But it's in play. If I play that ball, I'm going to get penalty strokes for playing a ball that was dropped in the wrong way, but I'm playing a ball in play. I'm not going to get penalized for a wrong ball, am I? Where in the rules does it say a ball that I dropped from shoulder height is a wrong ball?
It has to be redropped, right?
Well, it has to be redropped if you don't want to get a penalty. You don't want to get penalty strokes for playing it. But then the rule says, but if you do play it, now you're getting penalty strokes for having dropped the ball in a wrong way. If you got it in the right place, 1 penalty stroke for dropping in the wrong way, but it's in play. If it doesn't come to rest in the relief area, it's 2 strokes for a wrong place. If the ball is in play. All right. And so for all of you who have pause with this, all right, I'm dropping from shoulder height, but I let go of the ball with the intent to put it into play. I put it into play. I get penalized if I play this ball, but it's in play. It's not a wrong ball. Okay. So here we go. Substitute. To change the ball the player is using to play the hole by having another ball become the ball in play. Another ball substituted when that ball has been put in play. Whoops, here we go. To take the place of the original ball. So the second ball becomes the ball in play and the original ball goes out. In this case, because The ball's on the putt, the ball is on the golf course. Here's a player who's coming back to the tee. Maybe the ball's locked, maybe the ball's out of bounds, so the player doesn't have a ball in play, but making the stroke puts that ball in play. Maybe the player has just decided they hit it deep into the woods. They don't want to look for it. And they just want to play again from the tee. What's the status of that ball deep in the woods? They haven't started searching. It in play? As soon as the player makes this stroke from the teeing area with another ball, it switches, right? Okay. So whether the original ball was in play, the substituted ball becomes the ball in play, or whether the original ball was no longer in play because it had been lifted, because it had become lost, because it came to rest out of bounds. And if you were having trouble with this before, here's the confirmation. A substituted ball is the player's ball in play, even if it is replaced, dropped, or placed in a wrong way, in a wrong place, or even when the player was required to put the original ball back, like when you lift from the putting green, but then you put your special putting ball down. That substituted ball has become the ball in play.
If you drop from shoulder height, it stays in the new period, can you undo that penalty stroke?
You can undo it until you make a stroke at it.
You can pick it up and re-drop
Yeah. But if you make a stroke at it, now it's too late. You got the penalty. Right. And let's look at the substitution rule. We just looked at the definition. So certain rules allow a player to change the ball they're using to play a hole by substituting another ball. Well, here's a player taking relief from a penalty area. That's a typical substitution. By the way, what's the status of the ball in the pond before the player dropped the ball?
It's in play.
It's in play until the player substitutes, right? Then the switch will happen. And other rules don't allow you to substitute. You cause your ball to move and it says replace. Replace is code in the rules for you have to use the original ball. Replace. Replace means you use the original ball. You're allowed to substitute when you take relief. And that's free relief and penalty relief. The free relief was a new ad in 2019. And typically this will happen by dropping a ball or placing a ball. You can take relief if your previous stroke was from the teeing area, and you go back to the teeing area by playing a stroke from the teeing area also, right? So when taking relief, you can either use the original ball or another ball. And those rules, all those relief rules will say that you can use the original ball or another ball. And when you're playing your previous, playing from where your previous stroke was made, this player is going back and playing under stroke and distance from a spot in the fairway. Right? So that allows substitution, not allowed replacing. When replacing a ball on a spot, when you're operating under a rule that says you've got to replace the ball on a known spot, you have to use the original ball with 4 exceptions. And those are laid out under 14.2a under the exception. And they're common sense exceptions to this, but they're all replace rules. The original ball cannot be recovered with reasonable effort in a few seconds, so long as the player did not deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. The original ball is cut or cracked. I have this rule that allows me to pick the ball up to see if it's cut or cracked. And if it's cut or cracked, it says I can replace the ball with another ball if I wish to. So there's an exception to that where replace allows substitution. When the committee has signaled a suspension of play and a player stops, when they come back to resume play, you can always substitute, but you're replacing your golf ball where you stop. So that allows replacing. And in the case when somebody has just played my ball as a wrong ball, they thought they were playing their ball, played my, and knocked it 200 yards down range. I don't have to go and get that golf ball and bring it back. I can. I'm allowed to substitute under that ball, under that rule, and that rule is also a replace rule. So those are the 4 times that you can substitute under replace, but replace is code for you've got to use the original ball. When a player substitutes another ball, that ball is in play. And the original ball is no longer in play, even if it rests on the course. So it might already be out of play, might already be not in play. But if it's resting on the course and in play, it just went out of play. And this is true even if the player substitutes another ball when they're not allowed to do it. Picked up their original ball from the putting green and put their special putting ball right back down. They've put the special putting ball in play. If they play the special putting ball, they've played on, we'll see this in a second, they've played, they're playing in breach of the substitution rule, which assigns a 1-stroke penalty to the play of that substituted ball, but it's in play. Yep, here we go. What's the penalty for making a stroke in an incorrectly substituted ball? The player gets 1 penalty stroke and then plays out the hole with the substituted ball. Now that's the ball you keep playing with. If the player goes, oh, I wasn't supposed to do that, and picks it up and puts another one down, they've just done it again. And now this 1-stroke penalty is true only when the breach is just a breach of substitution. If the player has substituted a ball when they weren't allowed to substitute it in a wrong place and played the ball, now we're combining the 1-stroke penalty with the general penalty for playing from a wrong place. So I'm getting a general penalty for doing that. But when it's just a substitution error with no wrong place or anything like that, that's where the 1-stroke penalty comes in. And even if I substitute a ball when I'm not allowed to substitute, the substituted ball becomes my ball in play. Until I make a stroke at it, I can fix it and not get a penalty. But once I make a stroke at it, I've now got the penalty and I keep playing with substituted ball. And this is true even if I have replaced, dropped, or placed the substituted ball in a wrong way. Here we go. Here's our shoulder height guy. Or in a wrong place. Player dropped it properly, but it didn't come to rest in the relief area, and I play it. The ball's in play. Or if I did something like using a procedure that didn't apply. Now, here's an interesting one. Player finds a ball in a bush, thinks that it's there. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Okay? They pick it up. They don't even bother looking at it. And now they measure their 2 club lengths for unplayable. And they drop the ball. And what have they done? They've found a wrong ball on the golf course. And they've put it in play under a rule that doesn't apply. Because in order to use the lateral unplayable ball relief rule, I have to find my original ball. And I already told you that the ball that this player found wasn't their ball. The fact that they haven't realized it is irrelevant. They've just put a golf ball into play under a rule that doesn't apply. if they're lucky enough to look down and say, that's not my ball, they can save themselves a whole bunch of problems and penalty strokes. But if they play that golf, the committee now has to figure out what rule does apply to them. Well, what rule applies to you when you play a ball in play when you haven't found your original ball?
Lost ball.
Huh?
Lost ball.
Lost ball rule applies, to you, okay? And I played under the lost ball rule from where I thought my ball was, within 2 club lengths of where I thought my ball was. But it wasn't my ball that I found. I've hit a ball in play. Have I taken the relief properly under stroke and distance? Not by a long shot, have I? So we're going to apply stroke and distance to you. You got a 1-stroke penalty for that. And now we got to decide whether this wrong place was a serious breach or not. And since I was supposed to be back at the tee 240 yards back there, we're generally going to decide that's a serious breach. So I'm not going to, even though I've got a ball in play that I just hit, I'm not going to be allowed to score with this ball in play because it's a serious breach of wrong place. And so now I've got to correct this error by playing properly under stroke and distance 240 yards back with a 1-stroke penalty. So I got 2 penalty strokes for playing this ball from a wrong place and 1 more from the lost ball rule, and I'm back there. All right. So it's a really good idea when you pick a ball up and you think it's yours, you should make sure that it is. So but I did put a ball in play. I substituted because I dropped it with the intent to put it into play. Now, this intent to put it in play is sort of a funny thing. How many of you, when you drop the ball, think, I'm intending to put this in play? None of us do. And if you walked up to a PGA Tour player or an LPGA Tour player after they just dropped the ball and say, did you let go of that ball with the intent for it to be in play? They're going to look at you like you have 2 heads. They're going to go, what the heck are you asking me? I never think of anything like that. But if you say, you dropped that ball because you were intending to play your next stroke with it, didn't you? And what are they going to say? Well, of course, right? Well, isn't that the same thing as intending to put it into play? Intending to play your next stroke with it? Okay, so think of it that way, right? So I find this ball in a bush, think it's mine, measure my 2 club lengths, and drop this ball intending to play my next stroke with it. I put it into play, didn't I? But this is a bad thing. All right. For how to correct this error before playing this substituted ball, we're going to look at Rule 14.5. All right. And it's going to tell us that when I've substituted another ball for the original when not allowed, or when I have replaced, dropped, or placed a ball in a wrong way, in a wrong place, or by using a procedure that didn't apply, I can correct it without penalty. But I'm only allowed to do this before I play the ball. If I then play the ball, now it gets a if the original ball has not been found and the player puts another ball in play to take stroke and distance. So I haven't found my ball, my 3 minutes isn't up. But I say, I'm going to go play under stroke and distance, which means I peg a ball in the teeing area and I hit it. And then somebody says, just found your ball and my 3 minutes isn't up. I cooked my goose by playing this substituted ball because I put it into play. The other way to put it into play is what this other fellow has done. He's dropped the ball under stroke and distance back in the fairway, and that has cooked the goose of the original ball, even though the 3 minutes isn't up. Because if the player's original ball has not been found and the player has put another ball into play, well, in the teeing area, you got to make a stroke at it. But everywhere else, all you got to do is drop it or place it. and you put a ball into play under stroke of distance. Or if I put a ball into play under any of those rules that allows me to not actually find my ball, but just have knowledge or virtual certainty that it's somewhere. What's the most common place where a ball might be where I have knowledge or virtual certainty? Penalty area, right? Penalty area. So I have knowledge of virtual certainty my ball's in a penalty area, and I measure my two club lengths, and I drop a substituted ball. I now cannot go back to the original ball, even if it's found within 3 minutes. Because I proceeded, I put a ball in play under a rule that applies. I have to continue with that substituted ball. The player must not play the original ball, even if it's found on the course before the end of the 3 minutes. So here's a player who's he's got knowledge of virtual certainty that the ball is in a penalty area. Drops the ball, and then somebody says, hey, I just found your original. I think it's playable. Too late to go back to the original ball. This is one of those, I can't get the original ball back in play in the original location because I've gone too far. I've proceeded under an applicable rule. All right, so we've done a whole bunch of things that turned balls into wrong balls, and we've done a whole bunch with substitution at this point, which takes one ball out of play and puts another ball in. Now we're going to look at a bunch of mechanisms that, other than substitution, that puts a ball into play. So when my ball in play has been lifted from the course, or it's lost, or it's out of bounds, or no longer in play for some reason, I have a ball in play again. And here are the big four. When I've played either the original ball or another ball from the teeing area, that puts a ball in play. When I've replaced the original ball or another ball on the course with the intent for that ball to be in play, with the intent to play my next stroke with it, I've now put a ball into play. When I've dropped the original ball or another ball, I've now put a ball into play. They dropped it, intending to play my next stroke with it, or placed it. Here's a player who had temporary water interference on the putting green and is now moved to the nearest point of complete relief and is placing a ball on the golf course, taking relief. That puts the ball in play. Either the original ball or another ball. If a ball is returned to the course in any way with the intent for it to be in play, with the intent to play the next stroke with it, it's in play. Even if it was substituted when you weren't allowed to substitute. Even if it was replaced or dropped or placed in a wrong way, shoulder height. How many of you have played with somebody, I'll just take relief from the penalty area and they give it a shot? Right? Or they just, I'll just play one here. Boom. Right? Are they intending to play their next stroke with it? Yeah, they dropped it in a wrong way, but that put the ball in play. Wrong place, wrong way, or using a procedure that didn't apply. Here's a player who doesn't have knowledge or virtual certainty her ball is in that penalty area, but is trying to use the penalty area rule to put a ball into play. Well, the player is putting that ball into play. But unfortunately, if they hit that ball, the penalty area rule didn't apply to them. And the committee's going to have to decide what rule did apply to them. What rule applies to you when you put a substituted ball into play when you haven't found your original ball or have knowledge or virtual certainty? It's in one of those knowledge or virtual certainty rule places.
Lost ball.
Lost ball. And so is this player playing properly under the lost ball rule? Nope. Here we go again. You play that golf ball. You're going to get one penalty stroke for stroke and distance and 2 penalty strokes for wrong place. And it's probably a serious breach, which means you're throwing it in reverse and going back to where you played your previous stroke from. And by the way, when a ball marker is placed to mark the spot of a ball in play, and the ball hasn't been lifted, the ball is still in play. The ball marker is not a mechanism that changes the status of a ball. The ball marker is a mechanism to mark the spot of a ball that you're going to lift, and allows you to lift that ball in some circumstances without getting a penalty stroke. But it doesn't change the status of the ball. It's the lifting that changes the status of the ball. And when you take a lifted ball and replace it, you've put it back into play, even if the ball marker hasn't been removed, because the ball marker doesn't change the status of the ball. Now, I bet if you take a poll on either the PGA Tour or LPGA Tour, I bet 50% of the players will tell you that putting the ball marker on the green takes the ball out of play. And when they've replaced the ball, that the ball doesn't go back in play until they lift the ball marker. That's just a myth that lives and lives and lives. Jay, that's a video. And maybe we can send that, if the tour staff can send that around to the players. All right, questions on these things till I get, the next thing I'm gonna do is get into some real minutia of things that change the status of golf ball. I gave you the big four to take it out of play and the big four to put it back in. But any questions on these?
Is there any the description of a ball hit from outside the team zone, team area in a match play? That period between the hitting of the ball and the other player not telling you to replay. Is there any unusual status in the ball?
Okay, so now we're gonna try to.
I'm not trying to make something.
No, and this is an interesting question. Because it says if the opponent doesn't cancel the stroke, the ball is in play. And it's a little bit blurry on whether the ball is only in play once the player had it. How could the ball go into play by the opponent doing nothing? And that's a little weird. So my sense is that in match play, if you start from outside the team area, but if there's nothing documented here that says that, my sense is that the ball is in play, that you play from outside the team area by making a stroke at it until the opponent cancels it. And there is a point beyond which the opponent can't cancel. In other words, the cancel has to be done promptly, so that if I play second and I play from forward of the markers and we walk all the way down to the fairway, 200 yards, 300 yards away, so on, that the rule is going to say that the committee should judge if the player is trying to cancel the stroke at that point. It's too late. They passed the point because they didn't do it soon enough. But the rules are a little blurry in that as well. Since this happens so often, it's not a problem. But it's a mechanism to put a ball into play.
Maybe covering restarting play. You mark the ball in the fairway. Placed it. Not in play.
Right. So Mark asks another interesting question, and there's some myths built up around this also. Let's just start with the committee signaling a suspension of play. Right? When the committee signals a suspension of play, do all balls go out of play? It doesn't say anywhere that when the committee signals suspension of ball goes out of play. And in fact, no, it doesn't, because under some suspension, you're going to keep on playing. Yeah. Okay, and it doesn't say anything different in immediate suspension when you have to stop playing. So if you leave your golf ball on the golf course overnight without lifting it, it's in play the whole time. Because nothing in the rules tells me that anything happened that made it go out of play. Now, maybe a spectator came along and picked it up. So now it's out of play. And put it in their pocket. I don't have it anymore. And the rules handle that. And if I get back in, I can find it. And maybe the spectator picked it up and said, so what are you doing? And they threw it back. Now, did they drop that ball with the intention of putting it into play? No, but I think they dropped it so the player would play it. Didn't they? I think they put it back. By the way, if my caddy drops my golf ball with the intention for it to be in play, is it in play? Yeah. If I play that golf ball, I'm going to get a procedural penalty for that, because that's a ball that was dropped the wrong way. But the ball's in play. So, okay, so now we're coming back. And the committee's about to end the suspension. And before they've done the 2 beats, I replaced my ball on the golf course and let go of it, intending to play my next stroke with it. Is there anything in the resumption rule that says my ball's not in play until the committee signals the resumption? Yeah, no. Okay, there's nothing in there. What am I not allowed? I'm not allowed to hit that ball before the committee signals the resumption. But I put it back in play. The wind blows. You're now the next interesting question. I put the ball down for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm putting it back. One is that it's a ball that I replaced on the golf course, isn't it? And it would have to go into a different area of the course. Okay, it says the same area of the course. But the resumption rule says that I must resume from where I stopped.
Even though it's in play. No,
If-
when you put it down.
Mark, if I leave it there overnight, it's in play. If somebody moves it, I'm gonna put it back, aren't I? If I put it back in play and the wind blows it, or I resume play, I have to resume from where I stopped. I'm gonna replace it. Okay? If I accidentally move it, if I'm in the general area, a bunker or a penalty area, and I accidentally move my golf ball before resumption, haven't I caused my ball in play to move? Don't I get a penalty stroke for that? And don't I have to replace it?
So it's true even if you're gonna.
Wait before you resume. Before play is resumed.
The ball in play, isn't it?
Play, you move.
What part of Rule 9 says that I don't get a penalty if this is during a suspension play? Spoiler alert, it's not in there.
So
You can win some bar bets with this.
You can get a penalty for while play is suspended.
The rules say. Now, if you don't think that's fair,
But
you can write a letter to the Rules of Golf Committee and suggest a modification that will make the rules more complicated than they are now. And the Rules of Golf Committee will say, we've not had a problem with this, we're not going to change the rule. That's likely what they'll say.
I don't care.
Yeah, but that's that's right. It doesn't seem logical, does it? It seems counterintuitive, but that's what the rule says. Right? All right, let me get on to these last things and then we'll have lunch. All right. So what's a wrong ball? It's any ball other than the player's ball in play. All right, so the ball that I've got in play, and then 3 Twilight Zone balls. A provisional ball, that's not a wrong ball. And spoiler alert, it's not a ball in play. A second ball in stroke play, played because I'm gonna correct a breach of wrong place with a second ball when I still have my original ball in play. Or a second ball that I'm going to play when I'm uncertain how to proceed. My original ball is going to be my ball in play, and my second ball is going to just sit there in the twilight zone for a while. And under the provisional ball rule, there are going to be 6 ways that resolve the status of that provisional ball and turn it into a ball in play or wrong ball. And the other 2 rules, it's going to be the committee which tells me which ball is the ball in play. So it's much simpler with those other two rules. Right? So these balls are neither in play nor not in play. They exist between that status of in play and not in play. They exist in the twilight zone. Right? Examples of wrong balls. So this player's making a stroke at her golf ball. This other player's golf ball is the other player's ball in play, but for this player, that's a wrong ball. That's not her ball in play. Even though it's a ball in play for someone else, it's not in play for her. A stray ball on the range, or your own ball when it's out of bounds or lost or lifted. We've been through this. We've heard this song before, haven't we? And not yet put back into play. Well, what do we do if we make a stroke at a wrong ball? And what do we do if somebody else has made a stroke at my ball as a wrong ball? What do I do? Right? And Jay's going to help us out with this. So first off, you must not make a stroke at a wrong ball. So here's John playing Jay's ball. John's going to get a penalty for playing a wrong ball under this rule. And it's going to be a little different in match play than in stroke play. In match play, you get the general penalty of loss of hole. We're going to have a slightly different answer in 4-ball play. The side's not going to lose the hole. And in stroke play, the player who plays the wrong ball is going to get the general penalty. 2 strokes and needs to go and play their golf ball. But here's the interesting thing here. Now here's 4-ball. What's the effect of this making a stroke at a wrong ball? So in 4-ball, John plays Jay's ball. John and Jay are partners. Okay. Only the player, not the partner, gets the general penalty for breach of Rule 6.3. So the partner, so John gets a loss of hole penalty, but Jay doesn't. How do we work this out in 4-ball? This is true whether the ball played as a wrong ball belongs to the partner, the opponent, or somebody else. In match play, the player who gets the general penalty just has a ball that can't count for the side. And the penalty has no effect on the partner. We ask this question in our rules exam every year. And we're going to keep on asking it until everyone answers it correctly. The partner who didn't play the wrong ball never gets a penalty. The partner keeps on going. Match play and stroke play. Okay, in stroke play, the player got a 2-stroke penalty and now must correct the mistake by either finding their original ball, which, and by the way, by playing a wrong ball, that doesn't take your original ball out of play. Because you didn't put the wrong ball in play, did you? You didn't substitute and make the original ball go out of play. So if you can find your original ball within 3 minutes, you can go play it. If you can't, well, now you're going to take relief under the rules, which would be stroke and distance. Or maybe you have knowledge or virtual certainty that your ball is in a penalty area, and you're going to take penalty area. The stroke made at the wrong ball in stroke play and any more strokes made with that wrong ball don't count. Just the 2-stroke penalty for playing the wrong ball in stroke play. But the strokes played with the ball don't count. And if you don't correct the mistake and begin the next hole, then you're disqualified in individual play. But in 4-ball play, you're not disqualified as long as your partner has a score for that hole. And you just play the next hole with your partner.
We have an unusual situation here on 18. Hunter Mayhead and Jamie Donaldson are going backwards because Hunter Mayhead's hit the wrong ball. And Thomas Fagel, before we get into the hows and whys this happens, now what happens?
Well, it's, yeah, I mean, I certainly don't see it too often at this level, but if you play a ball other than your ball, it's a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play, and you have to go back and correct. So Obviously, it's very important to mark your golf ball. Usually players at this level have their unique markings, but in this case, Jamie and Hunter played each other's golf balls by mistake. So they noticed it when they got up onto the putting green, notified the referee, and went back to play again. So 2-stroke penalty and keep going.
It is a sinking feeling. The caddy gets partial blame for that, for sure. Of course, the final responsibility is on the player. Actually, I did it in Akron, Ohio on the 10th hole. I drove it down the left side of the fairway. It's a blind second shot or blind landing area. My playing partner drove it down the right side, and somehow my ball was on the right of the fairway and his was on the left. And we never looked. We did the same thing, had to go back. Shot penalty, but Paul, everybody should do it once because you will never do it again. Well, you got that right. Do it once. And you will never do it again. That's all I can say. It's just one of those things that happens, how it happens when you drive in the fairway. It's got to happen in an area like this where you can't see where your ball ends up. And something happened, maybe a funny bounce that caused Hunter to end up on the left side. Thought he was on the right.
So you try to regroup, but it's just still bad. Like even most amateurs that are listening and watching this morning, I've got a 3, you've got a 2, you've got a 3, I've got it marked. It's not the same as yours.
Right. You shouldn't, there's no excuse for making the mistake, but I have a question. Have they hold out and then go to the 10th tee, the next tee, number 1, what's the penalty if they don't catch it?
Yeah, so Paul, again, this is a rule where you have to correct before you play from the next team ground. So had they gone to 1 and teed off, they both would have been disqualified.
What if they don't hold out, both of them?
If they would have held out, they would have been okay. The trigger point is when you tee off in the next team ground. So if they put the ball in the hole, they still could have walked over the first tee and come back to correct it.
So if they hold out, they're still going back to the fairway then?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, Paul, a little slow on the uptake. But again, here's the thing. This doesn't happen to you very often. And you're not really sure what to do, or you have some ideas about what you're supposed to do. And when somebody explains the right thing to you and you're not tuned, like you're receiving an FM and they're broadcasting an AM, it doesn't necessarily come across. It's like, yeah, but what if you hole out? What if you hole out? What if you hole out? Paul's all fixated on the ball, on holding out. And Thomas is explaining, look, it's not a problem to hole out. The problem is starting the next hole. And Paul said, but what if you hold out? He's not getting an answer to his question. Holding out is okay, Paul. The problem is going farther than that and teeing off.
No,
Hey, so there we go. There's all of that, and it's lunchtime. I said that there were some pretty obscure things that change the status of a golf ball, but I'm not going to take 15 minutes to explain it right now. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this maybe has gotten some of those last pieces of the puzzle in place if you didn't understand it. And for those of you who did understand it, let me know if this is a better explanation than what we've been doing. All right. And Jay, if you want to say anything, I thank you for your attention and for your questions. It's great to be down here. I'm sorry that I brought the Philadelphia weather down with me today, apparently. But I think there's some South Carolina weather waiting for me when I get back to Philadelphia tonight. So we'll go with that.
Yeah, just thanks again, everybody. Like I said, our real treat to be here with CGA. Thank you to CGA. Thank you all of you, and have a terrific golf season.